The UFC's going to Sao Paulo, and we have you covered with Fight Night Picks. You are not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And just like that, we are back and set for UFC Sao Paulo. It's the Fight Night card headlined by Jailton Almeida. He's going to be taking on Derrick Lewis, and we were getting excited for back-to-back heavyweight main events, but because of one of the fighters on this week's main card, Jailton Almeida, and his overpowering wrestling out, is John Jones, supposed to be taking on Stipe Miocic. So scratched is that big-time heavyweight main event for UFC 295. You still do have this one to look forward to. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. Twitter and Instagram, X and Instagram, at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, respective socials, Matt Allen FNP. Matt, the last time the UFC went down to Brazil, it was way back at the start of the year. You had a card. It was just overwhelmingly full of Brazilian fighters, and they went to the tune of a 500 record. Now, that's good for batting average. If you're like a Ketel Marte, you strive for it. But the way that the Brazilians are set up on this card, there is one featured Brazilian fighter in every single matchup. All 13. No Brazil versus Brazil violence like we had earlier on this year, UFC 283. And again, on 283, I mean, you see a title not going Figueiredo's way. You see it in the fight where, wow, Glover Teixeira looking to hang on to the belt against Jamal Hill. He loses it there. So overall, this is just the first time that the UFC's gone to Sao Paulo since 2019, and it feels like a pretty big fight night card.
And I couldn't agree anymore, honestly, and I think you'd agree with me. There's a lot of prospects on this card that, honestly, I project a half-decent ceiling on. Being one of the Bonfim brothers, perhaps, Jailton Almeida, one half of the main event, there's a lot of fighters on this card who, okay, maybe this fight isn't the one that's going to get them into the title shot or the top 15, but you could see how they could put the pieces together and move really far. You know what fight I'm really excited for that might not be getting a ton of credit, but it's probably going to be that if you don't know, now you know kind of a matchup.
The co-main event.
I think Bahalio versus Abus Magomedov is a really fun fight because that's a fight where the winner's going to gain a lot, right? Two fighters with a lot of really just stock behind them, a lot of fanfare as well. And I think that's a fight where the winner's going to get one of those huge names next, and they might even see themselves as a co-main event or even honestly a main event of a fight night coming up.
Not that crazy because Kyle Bahalio 4-0 in the UFC. 3 of those 4 fights have already been co-main events. And for Abus Magomedov, he finishes Dustin Stoitzfus. And honestly, I'm surprised he's still in the UFC after losing to the eventual champ Sean Strickland in the main event on Canada Day earlier on this year. In terms of ranked fighters on the card, there are but 3 rookie debuts. Eduarda Moura, that is one of them. You have Victor Hugo as well as one Kaue Fernandes representing Nova União. Sophomore showings you have but none. There are no fighters rather making their second time out for the UFC. So again, it is one of those interesting cards. Lucas Almeida was supposed to have a fight on this card, Lucas Alexander. Alexander's opponent, David Onama, is out. So if anything happens with Alexander, if they get him back on this card, you know where to find us here at Fight Night Picks. You guys were so kind in the comment section last weekend, so keep those coming. It's pretty much a road to UFC 296 at this point, but it goes through Sao Paulo this weekend. So a lot of fights to talk about, a lot of Brazilian fighters represented on this card. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. And it's a surprise UFC debut, and it might seem like a weird bit of matchmaking coming up this weekend. The Bone Crusher Marc Diakiese, 7-7 since he debuted years ago at UFC 204. Diakiese looking to take on the newcomer out of Nova União, Kaue Fernandes. And Matt, UFC fans, they might already recognize Fernandes, or maybe him and his brother, Kaue Fernandes, who unfortunately lost a fight earlier on this year. Probably would have been able to punch his ticket to the UFC or Contender Series, but we do have one of the Fernandes brothers coming up, riding a 2-fight win streak over with the LFA. And if you don't know about Fernandes, let me cook for a little bit, because going back and watching the tape, it was a lot of fun, and you can find quite a bit of it out there, because for Fernandes, pretty easy to find the fight tape. For Eduarda Moura, I don't know. I mean, I could find a couple of them. I'll be completely honest
More
with
difficult than
everybody.
Fernandes.
And then with Vitor Hugo, you can find a little bit. But when you look at a guy like Fernandes training out of such a mega gym in Nova União, you always see Dede Pederneiras in the corner of a lot of those fighters. Jose Aldo kind of at the top of the marquee. Then you have fighters that end up becoming coaches. I'm thinking like UFC 1, 2, and 3, the video game zone, Johnny Eduardo.
Wow.
But for Kaue Fernandes, he's so interesting because you could bill him in all sorts of different ways. I could sell you a bit of a painting if you want, and I could say, Kaue Fernandes, he's a Muay Thai striker. And you go, okay, I'll believe it. I could also say, well, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Like, that does feature at the forefront of his game, and you go, wow, that's an abstract painting. But I can believe it as well. And that's the biggest thing that I found. You know, you talk about matchmaking and fighters coming in not on a ton of notice, or they come into unforeseen circumstances, and I could say, okay, well, look at Marc Man when she made her UFC debut. It was too much too soon. Look at Muhammad Naimov when he came in to take on Jamie Mullarkey, and you're kind of fighting not just up the order, so to speak, but you're also going up a weight class to do it. And all of a sudden, Naimov with wins over not just Jamie Mullarkey, but Nathaniel Wood as well. Fernandes gets a big-time opportunity. His last time out with the LFA, he was a big underdog, taking on Felipe Douglas, who was 21-5 at the time. They get into a clinch situation. You think, geez, here's the opportunities for some big knees. Fernandes drops his left shoulder a little bit and throws a left head kick shin to chin, and he knocks out Felipe Douglas. So when I look at a guy like Fernandes, Matt, he's like the old Marc Diakiese. He's very exciting.
Exactly.
And people might really like him. And for Marc Diakiese, I don't know if he knows what he is anymore. And he used to train. It was American top team. It was Great Britain top team with the man in the hat, not Chuck Mindenhall, but your guy, Brad Pickett. Marc Diakiese for this fight, training out of the Goat Shed, which has been a big gym recently in Southern Florida. But it's, what version of Diakiese do I get? And does Fernandes become automatically a star, or does he get dropped to the bottom of the roster?
It's like I've often said, I believed in Dante Exum. I still believe in Dante Exum, and luckily he has made it back to the league. But for Diakiese, it is hard to just kind of figure out where he belongs in the lightweight division, because he did have a lot of hype earlier on in his career, but you bring it up, only 7-7 in the UFC, which is a bit of a surprising record for a guy who has had as much shine as a fighter like Diakiese. But him being the opening fight on this fight card, I think does kind of tell you where his spot is in the UFC. But I'm glad you set it up this way, because it is true, right? Diakiese on a 2-fight losing streak, he still fought some pretty good fighters at 155 pounds in the UFC, win, lose, or draw, and guess what? He's got some good wins in the UFC too, and that's why I have a hard time with this matchup, because for Diakiese, we have seen a lot more of his wrestling develop as that UFC career has gone on. He was a lot more of that back foot counter striker heavy, where he'd throw those big missiles out of nowhere, and if he hit his target, they really wouldn't stand up to it. But Diakiese has had a game where it always has been focus on this one part and improve it, and then focus on another part and improve it. Remember when the answer to Marc Diakiese's game was elbows? He beat the brakes off Joe Duffy with elbows because, hey, it was an answer to help him deal with guys who tried to close the distance on the kicks and on his long-range punches. But I do think you bring up a really important question, because the improvements Diakiese's made in the wrestling, what is that taken away from in the rest of his game? Because I do still think he has some of those talents from the outside, but when you're not training those in the gym as consistently, I don't think we see Marc Diakiese being that kind of one-of-one special talent in the striking anymore. And that's where it's going to be interesting, because if he does just kind of stay on the back foot and try to go for some of those long-range takedown attempts, because the thing about Diakiese is he can land takedowns from really far away. He's that fast at closing the distance, but he's not the best at chain wrestling after he hits the hips of his opponent. But if he's able to shoot in out of nowhere and hit the hips of Fernandes, for as good as the game of Fernandes is, his takedown defense isn't lights out. It's good. He can take for underhooks and he can defend takedowns. It's not 0%, but if Diakiese is able to really stifle him with some of that movement on the outside and just surprise him at getting in on the hips, I could see that being trouble for Fernandes if he just starts to throw up submissions off his back.
And Fernandes will find himself in that spot a lot in his fights. And for Marc Diakiese, again, Goat Shed Academy, you look at some of the training partners that are out there. I'm going to pepper a couple of names out there, but Shazaib Rind, a striking dynamo in Arturo Vergara, Luxbay Montalvian, and then 7-0 Combate bantamweight prospect at Lazaro Dayron. So look out for him. But the biggest part for Diakiese is where he spent a little bit of time at Goat Shed before going down to Brazil. Home gym was always Great Britain top team, but from the Instagrams, he's been training with 3-time Cage Warriors title challenger Jack Grant, as well as Scott Askham over there at Jack Grant's Combat Gym. And when you look at a guy like Fernandes, I mean, he's a bit of an oddball. He really is, because in terms of how often this guy's fighting. Once per year from 2014 to 2019. He had a little bit of a find himself gap year in 2013. We all know what happened in 2020. We know what happened in 2020. And then he came back and he's fought once a year, 2021, 22, 23. So this is his second action of 2023 and just the first time in his pro career that he's fought twice in 1 year. But you go down through and you look at all of these finish wins. He's got 6 finish wins. 5 of those 6 are in the first round. And you look at the way that he's able to do it. I went back, I watched his fight against Luis Sardinha. And I think the reason why people might be a little bit down on Fernandes, even having this shiny record with only the 1 loss, you look at Sardinha. He beats Fernandes, and he hasn't fought since, which is a little weird for an undefeated fighter. Fernandes shot out of a cannon in the first round. And then in the second round, he can't get the takedown, and he looks completely wiped, and he tries to clinch a lot. And then in the third round, both guys are tired, but Fernandes is shooting from odd angles. He's trying to get the leg. He's trying to wrap up for a knee bar, for anything. He's getting dropped. He looked completely out of wind. He's looked great in those last 2 wins. He's been able to get finishes in the last 2. But this is my big problem for Fernandes. It's a lot of big actions on the feet. It's a lot of big actions for the takedowns. It's a lot of playing jiu-jitsu off his back. And 9 times out of 10, or rather 8 times out of 9, he's been able to go out there and get the finish. But the 2 things that I want to really focus on for Fernandes, when he gets even an ounce tired, he becomes a completely different fighter. Completely different fighter. He becomes defensively liable. His hands drop big time, and he really does struggle at the end of that first round going into the second to the third. The other thing with Fernandes, there's a lot of big action, a lot of striking, a lot of waiting, and then planning and looking for the counter strike. He also does this weird thing to where he likes to feint a lot, and he ducks his left shoulder and his head in and drops his hands at the same time, and he's there to get hit.
And it's one of those weaknesses that I could see affecting him as he moves up the ranks in the UFC. The weird thing about this fight against Diakiese is, if Diakiese isn't that high of volume, though, I just don't know if he's going to make Fernandes pay for it, so that's something I'm going to be watching out for. But this is what I want to say about this fight, just as like a closing note. I kind of joke about this in the heavyweight division, right? You have the top 15, you've got like 3 guys outside the top 15, then you have a group of anybody who could beat anybody on any given night, right? There's a lot of room beneath Marc Diakiese in the lightweight division, I believe, even though he is only 7-7 on a 2-fight losing streak. If Fernandes does lose this fight against Marc Diakiese, I think there's a ton of future opponents for him to get matched up with, to where it might not even be the worst thing for him long-term in his career if he does lose this fight to Diakiese, because it's one of those situations to where, and it's such a cliche at this point, you either win or you learn, and a loss to Diakiese I don't think sets you back to square one, right? It just proves that, hey, you're not ready for that step at that point.
Well, 8-1 is Fernandes' combined opponent record for him, 66-16, so it is pretty streaky that way. For Marc Diakiese, he is the favorite in the matchup. He was actually a heavy favorite when I had a look at this as I was writing my notes. The line has come down quite a bit. He's about a -154 is Diakiese on best fight odds. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Surprised to us as they are to you, Matt. I'm going to say over, under. I think it's going to be close. I'm going to say 62.5% Diakiese.
I think it's going to be over, personally.
It's going to be over. It's slightly over. 1,186 total votes, 65% Diakiese, 85% by decision for the 35% that are Fernandes, 60% by decision, 27% by knockout. And we've seen Diakiese in those last 2 wins that he has. Vyacheslav Borshev, Old Slavo Claus, and Damir Hadzovic. 2 guys that only strike.
Well, and to piggyback off of your point of how Fernandes fights like a different guy in the third round, this is the only thing I want to say about Diakiese. He doesn't like getting hit. Like, he does fight like a different guy if he starts to take a lot of damage, to where he's not going to take the risk to try to win the fight. So I do think that's a point I want to bring up, because let's say Fernandes is able to hit him with some of those blitzes early on, and it makes Diakiese a much more hesitant fighter on the back foot, then Fernandes could definitely roll to a win, but you probably know from where he set the Tapology votes and where I placed them at, I do think the veteran knowledge of Marc Diakiese is going to be enough for him to get this win, but there's a reason I bring up the fact that there is a lot of room beneath Marc Diakiese for you to continue to grow. I don't think Fernandes is going to fight Jim Miller next, you know? So I do have Diakiese in this opening fight, but I think it's going to be a really fun one. I
do this quite a bit. I'm going Yago zone, and I'll pick Kaue Fernandes. You know, you want to make that sexy pick. I think Fernandes is going to be able to get it done, and we've seen Diakiese go out there. Think of his fight against Rafael Alves, where he finds himself in a submission. If he's out there and he's going for some of those takedowns, he could find himself caught, but he's training with a lot of great fighters at the Goat Shed in Florida, and as well with Jack Grant, and now Octagon Zone, Scott Ashcombe. He's got a big fight fight coming up. So Matt, we're split on the pick in this one. Love to hear who you guys have. It's Brazil's Fernandes taking on England's own Marc Diakiese. Some big time fights in this card, Matt. The next one, it's in the strawweight division. Eduarda Moura, the debuting fighter, she's going to be taking on Montserrat Conejo Ruiz. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.
It's a double Dion.
Eduarda Moura. The nickname is Rhonda. She's on a speed run to the top. She's nearly 2 years into her pro career. She's already 9-0. But unlike your weird coworker Paul, who can just snap of a finger and beat Minesweeper, this speed run is now going to run through Mexico, and Moura is going to be taking on Montserrat Conejo Ruiz. And for Eduarda Moura, I found it really interesting. You go back and you look at some of the tape. You tell me where to find it. I'll be completely honest with you. I get mad when people say that. And I've said that multiple times. But for Eduarda Moura, I tried Facebook, I tried Twitter, I tried Daily Motion, I tried Brazilian websites, AG, Combate Global. I tried everywhere. It's really hard to find Eduarda Moura tape. And what I can say about her is she's a little bit like a fighter who made her debut a few weeks ago against Tainara Lisboa. It's Javina Oliveira. You've got such a little sample size of having 8 fights outside of the UFC, the 1 fight on Dana White's Contender Series, so I'll call that 9 fights total. There was 7 different organizations, so all over the place on the Brazilian regional scene. She represents Galpão de Luta, which is, of course, the gym that's represented by one half of your main event in Jailton Almeida. I don't know if Moura wins, if she's going to say, hey, get my guy Carlos Felipe back in the UFC like Jailton Almeida does. But for Eduarda Moura, what do we know? Well, she's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. You can see that out on her Instagram. You can see her doing a lot of striking with the gloves on in the gym. But then I watched Eduarda Moura fight, and again, a very, very limited sample size. But my goodness, when she gets happy on the feet, she gets not just happy feet like the movie, but she kind of like stands there, plants, and then just kind of throws like she's Chaos Williams, but there's usually not much there. She will go for a high amplitude of takedowns very, very early on, like her teammate Jailton Almeida, and her bread really does get buttered once it gets down to the mat. Pretty good ground and pound, really good top pressure, and a good submission game to go with it for Eduarda Moura. But in this one, it gets interesting because for Montserrat Conejo, a multiple-time Mexican wrestling champ. And you know her as the Scarfold Queen. She's able to do it against Cheyenne Vlismas. She was able to do it down on the regional scene as well against Janisha Moranjan over with Invicta. Ruiz, one of those fighters that loves to go for the upper body throws, get her opponents into bad positions. Now, you heard the drop at the start of the video, the double Dion. What's that about? Well, the 2005 World Junior Championship. Sidney Crosby, was he on the team? Sure he was. But it was Dion Phaneuf landing a double hit against 2 folks in an actual hockey game. Well, Montserrat Conejo Ruiz was a recipient of a double Dion courtesy of Amanda Lemos in a knockout loss not that soon after she had beaten Cheyenne Vlismas to get UFC win number 1. Ruiz took about 2 years off. She fought just a couple of months ago against Jacqueline Amorim. And Matt, I'll throw the scorecards up there. 2 judges in that one, Camijo and Ron McCarthy, scored that 20-16 going into the 3rd round. That means 2 judges had it 10-8 round 1, round 2. I also had it 10-8 round 1, round 2. Conejo got completely outclassed when it got down to the mat. And the big question marks with Amorim were, A, gas tank, because it had faltered her against Sam Hughes. And we know Amorim as being a big-time first-round finisher. But C, I mean, Conejo, you would thought with the lineage that she has, the grapplers that she trains with out of 10th Planet in San Diego, King's MMA and Entram Gym, that she would have some solution. But she just kind of faltered and wilted in that one.
And that's always disappointing to see, right? Because you know how good of a grappler she can be when she gets the fight into positions where she is in that top spot where she can be the more dominant fighter. But I thought she was going to have more answers off her back in terms of either scrambling or even on the feet, to be honest. Like, Conejo has one of those styles to where, okay, if you're a long-rangey striker who could really make her pay, you're going to have a field day. You're going to be able to hit her before she can clinch with you. And she doesn't have a lot of answers from that back position. But she is a little bit like Clint Capella, right? Like, you can upgrade if you can get Rudy Gobert. Chet Holmgren looks pretty good in that spot. Like, if you put that person in a position where they can be really effective, if you squint, they might even look like a Hall of Famer. And for Conejo Ruiz, that's what she is able to do with that clinch game and with her top takedowns. And that's why I have such a hard time with this fight, because if Moura is happy to just plant her feet and stand in that position, then those clinches are going to be coming more often as the fight rolls on. And if that is the case, not like Ruiz is a 10 out of 10 grappler, right? I don't think she's going to get the takedown every time she gets that head and arm choke position, but the more chances you give somebody, you're just tempting fate, right? And for Conejo, what I worry about is, at 30 years old, does she still have the time to make those improvements in at least her striking game? Because I feel like if she did have at least more of a threat in that one spot, you could see the rest of her game continue to improve because she'd have at least more threats.
Moura just fought on Contender Series. She got a win against a much, much smaller opponent, similar in size.
And she's going to be bigger in this fight.
Ruiz in Janaina Silva. And so in the opening seconds of that fight, Silva marches forward, Moura drops down, gets a takedown, spends the entirety of that round or whatever's left in the round on top. She ends up getting the finish, and it was like a no-hook rear naked choke that was opened up by her ground and pound. And she even got into a nice man and crucifix in that spot. It was really well done. Again, another Moura fight that you can go back and see her fight against Eduarda Santana, who was also billed as Duda. Like, remember Duda Santana? She was going to be the next biggest thing. But Moura goes out there. She looks completely yoked. She gets the win in that one fairly easily. But I'll throw the picture up there. That was the oldest looking 19-year-old that she had fought. So again, Moura's 2 years into her pro career, almost 2 years into her pro career. She's 9-0. And Craig Allen, and trust me, I know I'm trying, like, it sounds like I'm pumping my tires. I could find 2 of her fights, and one of them was on Contender Series. So that should go enough to tell you that I'm looking at Tapology right now, and they say minus 450 Moura. I don't fucking know. Why the fuck would you put any money on that? That's stupid. Try and find the fight tape, but it's not out there. So regardless of who we make a pick on, just consider this one a wash, call it pop and popcorn, and move on to see another day. For Montserrat, Conejo, Ruiz, why is this fight really important? It's because almost exactly a month out from her loss to Jacqueline Amorim, where 2 judges had her losing 10-8 in the first 2 rounds, and she got finished in the 3rd round. She accepted this fight. It was originally supposed to be 1 championship from 1 fight night. The old striker, Soyul Kim. Kim is out. Ruiz takes this fight. So a month from losing, accepts the fight, and then gets a month to come into this one. So I wouldn't anticipate that the striking skills are going to be all that much improved. You got a little bit of a southpaw versus orthodox thing going on here. We'll see if Ruiz can have some of the takedown defense that we knew her for outside of the UFC. We'll see how this one plays out. Moura is a really big favorite. And listen, Topology, again, it's going to be a wash. I'm going to say over-under just because of where the odds are. 85% Moura.
They're probably over.
Yeah, okay. 1,214 total votes, 92% Moura, 57% by submission, 8% by Conejo Ruiz, 76% by decision. If I can find 2 fights, I just stay away from it. Matt, who's your pick here?
I've got Moira, but everything you bring up is reasonable. I just want to know where the nickname Ronda comes from. Like, that's all I've been thinking about.
Goes for a lot of takedowns.
I guess. It's just like, who's like, hey, you're Ronda now. Just always been a weird
Teresa Bleda is Ronda.
I know, it's like a much more common nickname than you would ever think. That's why I'm asking. Alexieva, like, there's been multiple Rondas. Excuse me, I do have her in the matchup. Even though her tape was very difficult to find, like you bring up, it's not like the tape on Conejo Ruiz is beautiful.
Hard to find, it doesn't fucking exist!
Okay, you said hard to find. I'm just saying the words you said. Calm down.
Later on in this video...
Let's get mad about nothing, why don't we?
Later on in this video, I'm going to tell you about Victor Hugo. His tape was really easy to find. He fights in a mall before he fought on Contender Series. You can find it easily. Kaue Fernandes, very easy to find. Eduardo Moura, it doesn't exist. It's like a magic trick. So Matt, I will go with Moura. But if the wheels fall off, I could see her easily losing this fight. So Matt, this is going to be an interesting one. Let us know in the comments section who you have. And if you could find any extra fight tape on Moura, apart from the fight against Santana and the fight that was on Contender Series, we have some big-time bangers on this card. Almeida's taking on Lewis in the main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The D Gomes show touches down in Sao Paulo and about a 5.5 hour drive from her gym at PRVT in Curitiba it is to get herself to Sao Paulo to the gymnasium. But Matt, when we look at this fight, I mean, D Gomes, this really is her show at this point. She's taking on Angela Hill, who's coming off a fight of the night against Mackenzie Dern in a main event her last fight. She's ranked in this women's strawweight division. It's a Shark Tank.
That's what I have to bring up. Is Angela Hill Dolph Ziggler? Hear me out. You're never surprised where she lands on the card, right? She could be the main event one week. She could be the co-main event. She could be one of the opening fights on the card. She always is probably a little bit scrappier than you assume. And every prospect who has ever fought in the division tries to make a name off of her at some point, it feels like.
I don't understand it, but what
She's
do
the
know,
Dolph
Matt,
Ziggler.
Denise Gomes inside of the UFC. I mean, she fought in Contender Series last year. She got a big-time win over Rayani Amanda. That time, Rayani Dos Santos now. She loses to Loma Lookboonmee in a short and abbreviated fight for Denise Gomes. She gets completely out-grappled in that one by the Muay Thai striker Lookboonmee. And of course, if you want to play MMA math, well, Angela Hill beat Lookboonmee, and Gomes did lose to her. But for Gomes, her last 2 times out, she's an underdog. And she's able to go out there and pick up those wins. A big-time win over Bruna Brazil. She finished her in the second round. She finishes Yasmin Jauregui.
That was a big
the
one.
double right hand, and then she just kind of keeps her down and hits her with a lot of unanswered shots. Jauregui protested a little bit because why wouldn't you? It's your first professional loss. But for Gomes, a giant winner last time out. So now she gets a shot at the rankings. She's dyed her hair blonde, so you'll see that this fight week. Her and Carol Hossa out of PRVT. But again, a big shot, and now all of a sudden, Angela Hill's back where she's always been. You're a stepping stone. Have fun. And we knew Angela Hill for having 2 stints in the UFC, becoming the Invicta strawweight champ back in 2016. And really, I think her best time in the UFC, it was kind of the later stages, 2019 to 2020. She was able to go 4-1. The only loss in that stretch was to Yan Xiaonan, who's at the upper echelon of this division currently. And Angela Hill, I mean, she's just fought everybody at this point. You don't get to 10-13 in the UFC without...
She's the Derrick Lewis of the strawweight division.
Derrick Lewis, Dolph Ziggler, how many more do you have?
Well, no, it's just there's some fighters out there who it's like, how many guys are you going to have a rematch with? Like, you just got to look for the spot in the ranking where they haven't fought. For Derrick Lewis, it's Jailton Almeida. For Angela Hill, she's never fought D Gomes.
We've seen D Gomes in some of these previous fights. You look at her fight way back when. You're taking on Milana Dudieva, and you're getting dropped early in that one. You got to rally in the second. You get the finish in the third. Denise Gomes has shown that she has really good toughness, good stick-to-itiveness, bad takedown defense. She's working on it. I mean, she's at a good school to work at that, or work on that.
She's still really young.
And you look at Gomes, she just marches forward. So to me, she's a little bit like a brawler. Shot caller, 20-inch...
Blades on the Impala, Kala getting laid tonight. Yeah, I know that song.
Yeah, everybody knows Lil Troy. And if you want to see a guy awkwardly dance,
Swishers rolled tight.
He's just having the most awkward dance by himself.
You're gonna hit the highway, maybe get money my way.
Better way.
Yeah, you didn't think I was gonna go that far with it.
But when you look at this fight, Matt, Gomes, if she's not able to close that distance and land those big shots, she could have some trouble. And for Angela Hill, again, look at her last fight against Mackenzie Dern. That was her name and Gracie against Logan Storley performance. Wow! Mackenzie Dern can box, and she gets a knockdown in the first round. A big right cross that really gets over the defensive Angela Hill, lands the knockdown. Now all of a sudden, Angela Hill's knockdown ratio is 2-4 to 2 against. You'll remember that Amanda Lemos knockdown, but the big stick-to-itiveness from Hill, round 2, round 3, to make that a fight of the night. But when I look at this one, Matt, what people are going to forget, they're going to remember the knockdown in the first round. They're going to forget the fact that round 3 and round 5, Mackenzie Dern 10-8s in those rounds. Angela Hill's had a rough road with those fighters that can close that distance.
Angela Hill's almost 39 years old. Yeah, she's not in her prime anymore. I think that's fair to say. But that has always been the thing about Angela Hill throughout her career. It's, hey, we want you to fight this prospect. And it's not like she's lost all those fights, right? You bring it up. She has been able to fight at the top of a lot of these cards because she always has been in the rankings. And it's like, oh, you're not fighting someone just coming off Contender Series. You're fighting them after they are 2, 3, 4 wins into their career. And to Hill's credit, the fact that she is so good at her game at this point, being that high volume on the back foot kind of a fighter. It has worked out for her in a lot of her career, but you bring up the knockdowns against, and that's the one thing that I do start to worry about, because you know what everybody's game plan is when they fight Angela Hill. It's, hey, we can't stay on the outside. She's going to hit us with 1,000 punches and never get tired. So everybody's plan is get on the inside and try to hit her with big shots. Not everybody has the power of somebody like D. Gomes, and I worry that if the durability of Angela Hill has faltered even a little bit, well, hey, everybody's trying to get on the inside anyways.
Nah.
D. Gomes is probably going to do the same. So if she is able to get on the inside and hurt Hill, not that I'd be surprised, because I think it could happen, but that's going to completely shift the whole entire fight. But there is a flip side to this too, and it's every Marina Moroz fight that's ever happened in the UFC. If Angela Hill can just stay on the outside with her volume, and D. Gomes feels so uncomfortable at closing that distance to where she doesn't want to eat 2 or 3 shots before she can land her one big one, then we could see Gomes being very hesitant on that back foot, because at only 23, turning 24 soon, but still pretty young in her career, I wonder that, okay, you have your first loss, it's kind of in the rearview mirror, you've looked a lot better since that, but is Angela Hill going to be another one of those veteran kind of skill checks where, hey, you're good, but you might not be good enough to beat Hill, and then you can go on your run afterwards? Because Hill, I've always had a hard time with her in the UFC. She is 15-13, it's not like all of her fights have gone her way, but every time you count her out, she's going to look a little bit better than you think, and every time you believe in her, she's probably going to come up a little short, and that's why I've always had a hard time with Angela Hill.
4 fight of the nights for Angela Hill, a 23 fight sample size. She's the underdog in the matchup against a much younger D. Gomes.
And a lot of those have been in the public eye, right? Like they've all been in the UFC and Invicta for the most part.
They have. When it does come down to this one, we'll have a look at the Topology vote. Surprise us there to you. I'm going to say over under 70% D. Gomes in the fight.
I think they'll be under.
They're over. So 1,280 total votes, 73% Gomes, 53% by decision, 39% have Gomes to win by knockout for the 27% that have Hill. 92% have her to win by decision. The last 3-round fights for Angela Hill against Emily Ducati and Lupita Godinez. She won those both by decision. I think Angela Hill wins a 3-round decision against Denise Gomes. It's a hometown fight for Denise Gomes. But I go back to even the fight against Ariane Carnelosi on that run, 2019, 2020. She's able to go out there, bust her up. It's a TKO finish due to a doctor's stoppage. But Angela Hill, if you can't solve that riddle of just move forward, which we've seen D. Gomes have been able to do against Bruno Brazil and against one Yasmin Jauregui, taking that, as a really, really big underdog. You can't stress that enough. There's a lot of fighters on this card who've come through as massive underdogs. Gomes is one of them. Elves Brener is the other, and I get a little bit on that one later, but when I do look at this one, I think Hill's going to be able to get it done on the outside. Trains with a very good gym at Alliance MMA. Jenna Bishop with the BJJ. Jessica Penne as well. So we'll see how this one plays out, but I'm going to go with Angela Hill here.
I'll take the hometown hero. I was thinking about Angela Hill because I do think she has a skill set to go out there and win this fight, but I worry about her durability if D. Gomes is able to get on the inside and hit her with some big shots, because Gomes has proved that she is more than a capable puncher at this stage of her career, and if Hill is starting to have some of those susceptibilities in her game, then I could see Gomes going out there and getting a big win.
Again, Gomes' UFC debut was on 11 days' notice. The loss to Loma Lookman, so not a full camp in that one. She also has experience at bantamweight, flyweight, and now at strawweight. Does D. Gomes? We're split on the pick. Let us know who you have in the matchup. Some big-time fights in this card, Matt. Almeida taking on Lewis in the marquee. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks. We always say, let's get into it. MMA's Ryan Tannehill looking to keep on making good on that second opportunity. We have Modestas Bukauskas already 2-0 in that second stint with the promotion, and he's looking to move it forward against the undefeated knockout artist, or is he? It's Vitor Petrino. Matt, there's some featured artists or some featured fighters on this card. Obviously, Jailton Almeida is one of them, but then you have a couple of guys at a CM system, and that's Vitor Petrino and Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. They're getting a lot of buzz. They're getting a lot of promotion from the locals in Brazil. They're doing a lot of photo ops as well, those 3 men. And this is one of them. I mean, Vitor Petrino is such an interesting guy. Starts off his pro career, knocks out Rodolfo Bellado. Let's run it back on Contender Series. Knocks him out again. He gets into the UFC. He has a fight of the night grappling match without a finish against Anton Turkalj, but so far in the UFC for Petrino, it's been nothing but wins. The Turkalj win in his last time out, he solved the riddle that is the outside striker, Marcin Prachnio. Prachnio looked really good in the first round. Petrino's hands started to drop quite a bit. He couldn't get the takedown in the first round. He was able to rally through it. A close second round, but in the third round, Petrino getting the submission win over Pragnio. So when it does come down to this one, it very much is a clash of styles. Petrino is aim big, miss big to the nth degree. I remember when we were kids, Matt, we used to talk about our favorite baseball players, and we always try to replicate their swings. And we'd sit there and we'd do the big hurt, the Frank Thomas.
Gary Sheffield.
The Gary Sheffield, always moving his bat. But I remember we'd always try and unsuccessfully do the Jason Giambi, and about halfway through your swing, you'd let go, and you just have the top
We
hand.
weren't on Mexican supplements like he was, though.
Pull the bat through. It was in Japan. It was just a sushi.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But
I eat sushi all the time. I'm
Vitor
not a big guy.
Petrino's one of those guys to where he swings big when it's on the feet. And if he misses, he tires himself out quite a bit. And we saw Pragnio out there kind of pip-pop, doing a little bit of that.
A hippie, a jibby.
On the outside, and Petrino didn't really have an answer for it to where he was eating the leg kicks. He has a really high Muay Thai guard. He's getting hit a lot to the stomach.
You've got Bukauskas by the sounds of it.
Then he's drawing his hands down. Petrino really did struggle, but if he gets the takedown, he can really get wins out there. And if you can go out there and grapple for 3 rounds against Turkali, it really does say something. So for Petrino, a really interesting slew of wins, a lot of finishes. For Bukauskas, again, first run in the UFC didn't go all that well. There were a couple of chintzy decision losses. It was punctuated by Khalil Roundtree taking a knee home with him. So Bukauskas goes away. He fights over with Cage Warriors where he was once champ. And he becomes the champ again. He gets that big time win. You'll remember it against Chuck Campbell. And as that last round of their fights going on, he lands that big right hand as Campbell's backing away. Gets a finish. Now Bukauskas, a winner in the underdog slot against Tyson Pedro. And his last time out, he gets another decision win over Zach Pounga. Now, I'm not here to say that that's one of the chintzier decisions. Was it as bad as Fury versus Ngannou? I don't know. But it had me in an uproar, and there was quite a bit of fervor out there on the Twitter sphere at the time. Now it's X. So Bukauskas, again, he's had a lot of these close decisions. We know him as a multiple-time British kickboxing champ. We know him for training with his father, Gintis Combat. You know Gintis. But for Bukauskas in this camp, training at a close-by gym, and training with some really big fighters as well, Matt. I'll let you kind of cook on this one, but it's an interesting kind of clash of styles here.
I have a really hard time with this matchup because Bukauskas has all of the tools he needs to go out there and win this fight. You set it up. If he's able to stay on the back foot, use his movement, mix in some of the kicks. Probably don't throw a lot of them, though, to be honest, because if one of those does get caught, Petrino's so strong in that top position that even though Bukauskas is not a bad grappler by any means, Petrino's still probably going to be strong enough to hold him in a lot of those positions, especially if he does get wrist control up against the cage. But that's the big issue I have with this fight. Bukauskas does a great job of moving his feet, but his back can still be on the cage as he moves his feet. And if that's the situation he finds himself in, it does make Petrino's job a little bit easier to help cut that cage off, make the takedowns easier to then go for. But that's the hard time I have with this fight. Bukauskas is one of those fighters to where if he hit 15% harder, he's the best fighter in the world. Because if he had that kind of power that really forced fighters to get off him to where they couldn't chase him down and try to close the distance up against the cage, I think he would be like a bad MFer. It's just the fact that guys don't seem to have that much respect for the punching power coming back their way. He can hit them with clean shots, and they are clean shots. He's got great technique, but they're not always going to hurt them, rock them, and that's the thing. If he could hurt Petrino, really rock him, and keep him from just that constant forward pressure, then I think we could see a really nice performance from Bukauskas, but that's what the fight comes down to.
Bellotto hit him clean and dropped him in their second matchup, and then Petrino stormed back and knocked him out.
But still, do you just think Bukauskas shouldn't try to hurt him? My point is, if he hurts Petrino, it's going to make his job that much easier circling away and avoiding some of those takedown attempts and the power shots as well. I don't think not hurting a guy, Craig, is a bad idea in a fight.
Scoring goals, you win the game.
What are we talking about on this? Who scores the most goals is going to win?
Bukauskas, Matt, in this matchup, again, I talked about him, he's always trained under his father. He's always represented Lithuania and England quite proudly. But for this one, he's training at a BST MMA. You may go BST MMA. Well, you probably saw the graphic. Blood, Sweat, and Tears MMA. I'm going to name a gym.
Name.
I'm going to make it awkward. It's like Load and Reload from Metallica. Look up what the cover art is on those ones. But when you consider this matchup, Bukauskas training with Cage Warriors top man. He wasn't able to get the middleweight strap, but Will Curry, a very, very good fighter. And Lithuania's own Arūnas Andriuškevičius. It's a hard name to pronounce, also out of Lithuania. When it does come down to this one, Matt, Petrino is a very, very big favorite. We have to look at the Topology votes. Always in the underdog role is Bukauskas. I'm going to say over under 80% Petrino.
I think they'll be under 80, but it'll be the favorite.
And it's over, so 1,296 total votes, 83% Petrino, 24% by decision, 64% by knockout for the 17% that are Bukauskas to win, 72% by decision. Matt, Modestas Bukauskas, 15-5. You look at his losses. He has been finished by TKO in 3 of those losses. Roundtree, Jimmy Crute, John Redmond, and Pavel Dorofei. That one was by heel hooks, not by knockout. But it's been a while, and he's one of those guys that it really does match up. Okay, it's the fitness and the conditioning we got like Bukauskas, and it's just that all-encompassing power of a guy like Petrino.
I think Petrino gets him down early, though. It does even the odds in that factor, because it's not going to allow Bukauskas to just evade a lot of those takedown attempts, which is going to force Petrino to burn that much more gas, and it's going to make Bukauskas try to waste a lot more energy to get back up to his feet, and that's why it's a hard fight to predict, because I do have Petrino in the fight, I'll say that right now, but if Bukauskas can just defend a lot of the takedowns, but that's where I'm going to stop on this. I don't think it's going to be the most aesthetically pleasing fight, because I think we're going to get these guys stuck a lot. I think Petrino is going to be going for takedowns against the cage. I think Bukauskas is going to have those like kind of underhooks. I think we're going to get some clinch work out of these guys for a large portion of it. The difference is, though, I think Petrino is going to be the one activating or at least engaging a lot of those positions, and if he's the one going for takedowns, and Bukauskas isn't hitting him with like Travis Brown-esque elbows, then I think Petrino is going to get a decision if he's not able to get the finish.
From my notes, 1 minute and 5 seconds left of the first round where Petrino's taking on Marc and Pragnio. Belly breathing, waist hands, Petrino. Round 2, 20 seconds in. Petrino flips a Pragnio takedown attempt and gets it into Petrino's world, and he does a good job on top. I mean, I've kind of harped on it for a really long time with Bukauskas going back to his fight against Nasiglia with Cage Warriors, to the fact that Bukauskas didn't have good takedown defense his first run through with Cage Warriors. It's gotten a little bit better as his career's progressed. So if Petrino can't get them early and he tires himself out, you could see another Bukauskas fight similar to the Tyson Pedro re-entry at UFC 284 earlier on this year. I'll ever so slightly go with Petrino, but to see the odds where they're at and see the crowd where they're at, it just leaves me cause for concern as all. In this one, both of us going with Brazil's Vitor Petrino to get the win. A big-time fight, Matt. The next one on the card.
A fun one.
Ooh, boy. You know what it is, and you're not going to want to miss it if you don't. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Clash of Styles at welterweight coming up this weekend. Elizeu Zaleski de Santos looks to turn away another wrestler. That really is the story of this fight, but I know a lot of people are excited about it. Gladiator Rinat Fakhretdinov, this guy has really taken the world by storm. He's 3-0 already in the UFC. You remember him from Dana White's Looking Forward to a Fight, where he landed a clubbing overhand right against UFC vet Eric Spicely, finished him, and then he's able to springboard into the UFC and wins over Andreas Michailidis. Brian Battle with a close, in-tight right hand that drops Battle in the third round. And then his last time out against returning knee braces own Kevin Lee, and he's able to go out there, land that same right hand and drop him. And Matt, Herb Dean gave Kevin Lee a little bit of time.
He did.
But in for a penny, in for a pound, Kevin Lee was out, and that was a disgusting submission win for Rinat Fakhretdinov. So now he gets a big opportunity to take on another name at 170 in Elizeu Zaleski de Santos. And Elizeu went on a run like none other years ago, where he was able to punctuate it with some really
like a
big
Michael
wins.
Red 2003, 2004 kind of a run.
I think of the Curtis Millender win that gets him against Li Jingliang, that gets him finished.
Sean Strickland's like, excuse me, I'd like a mention right now. He got knocked out by Elizeu.
Why would I say Curtis Millender that then gets him a fight against Li Jingliang? He beats Curtis Millender, and then he fights Li Jingliang. In the overall gravity of things, he goes on a crazy win streak. I buried the lead. The Sean Strickland fights before the Curtis Millender fight. So a giant win over the now middleweight champ down to 170, where Elizeu is able to throw that crazy spinning wheel kick, and he's able to get that win. But if you look at it, it's Strickland, it's Vengermini, it is Millender, and then it's gone kind of squirrely. Elizeu's had a USADA suspension between his Benoit Saint Denis win, his fight against Abubakar Nurmagomedov, his last time out. It's a split decision win, and he's really kind of just gone off balance with things, so to speak. So for Elizeu, it's defending the takedowns, it's keeping things standing, it's landing really good combinations. But if you look at Elizeu, 2 of his last 3 fights, not including the Benoit Saint Denis fight, it's a loss by split decision of Muslim Salikov. It's a win by split decision against Abubakar Nurmagomedov. His striking percentages and his output have been all over the place in those 2 fights. And now coming up against a premier wrestler, a guy who specialized in freestyle wrestling as a young man in Rinat Fakhretdinov, it could get difficult for another one of those marquee Brazilian fighters in this one.
This is a really difficult fight for Zaleski dos Santos because he always needs distance to land the most devastating strikes that we've ever seen him land. He's someone who does like to load up on those shots. He does do a really good job of feinting from the outside, especially with his kicks to start landing his punches, because he is at his most effective when he's able to throw both. I wouldn't say he's a phenomenal boxer like a 10 out of 10, and I wouldn't say he's the best just pure kicker of all time. He's got great kicks, don't get me wrong, but he is at his best when he's able to mix the 2 in combination, and that's where I think he's going to have a really hard time with this fight, because unless he starts throwing a ton of leg kicks, and leg kicks are a part of his game, don't get me wrong, but he's going to go to the body and go to the head a lot. He's not a fighter who just goes out there and spams at the calf. I think those leg kicks would help slow down some of that forward movement of a guy like Fakhretdinov, and they're harder to catch too, because that's another thing I keep on going back to. Zaleski loves that switch kick to the body. It's very similar to Edson Barbosa. It's a very fast strike for him, and it's great that it's fast. But if he does start to tire in that second and third round, because that's the biggest thing I think we have seen out of Zaleski dos Santos since, I'd say like the Muslim Salikov fight, I'd say, just because he is getting up there a little bit, he starts to throw those shots a little bit heavier as the fight continues, and that's what I worry about, because early on, I think he's still really accurate, can still have really good pop in his shots, but if he does start to labor, if those movements are a little bit slower from that long distance, is that going to allow Fakhretdinov to land some of those shorter counter shots like you bring up?
Well, they actually rallied in that fight against Abubakar Nurmagomedov.
He did, but again, it wasn't a fight where it's like he was landing a ton of offense early. The most of the time, it's a fight where Zaleski dos Santos has to land those longer range shots, guys that get on the inside, give him some trouble, then he can get that distance back.
Yeah, Salikov in the matchup where he's taking on Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Salikov off the back foot. It's a lot more boxing from Zaleski. And likewise in the Nurmagomedov fight, you're defending takedowns at the start. Both guys become boxers in those 2 fights against Nurmagomedov. 42 of 113 for 37% significant strike percentage for Zaleski, and then again against Salikov, 46 of 138. That's good for 33%. It might surprise people that Zaleski in his 10-3 UFC run, a lot of bonuses years ago, 41% is his just resting significant strike percentage rate. So a lot of hit, but a lot of miss as well. And when you're taking on a guy like Fakhretdinov, you got to have that takedown defense. It's 65% takedown defense for Zaleski over a large sample size. So again, for a guy like Fakhretdinov, you know him as the GFC middleweight champ. He got that win over Alberto Uda that was in the UFC. He beat a decent level of competition coming up. It was always going to be a question mark of what does his gas tank look like down at welterweight, because that was a big jump from 185 to 174 Fakhretdinov, but it hasn't looked that bad. And he's training out of a really big gym, an American Top Team now. Rodrigo Nascimento, who's on this card, is at that gym, as well as Dennis Talulin. So a little bit of mixing it up with those 2 guys for Zaleski at a CM system with Vitor Petrino was on the fight before this. So when we do have a look at the fight, Matt, again, it is a clash of styles. A guy kind of up there in the twilight of his career. He's not favored to win this fight. The favorite is Rinat Fakhretdinov. We have a look at Topology. I'm going to say over under 90% Fakhretdinov here.
Probably over.
And it is slightly
that
over.
That breaks my heart.
1,334 total votes, 92% Fakhretdinov, 47% by decision, 29% by knockout. For the 8% that have Zaleski, so you're saying there's a chance. 70% have him to win by decision. Matt, we haven't seen Fakhretdinov lose since, 2014. He's won 17 fights in a row.
Pretty impressive, I'd say.
Does he make it 18 fights in a row?
I gotta be honest, in a lot of these, you have kind of the older fighter with a bigger name versus the younger guy who they're trying to make it. And not like, Rinat is 32, you know, he's in his prime right now. I'd say he's at a good spot in his career. You think, hey, there's 3 or 4, maybe even 5 ways that older veteran has those niches in their game to where they can go out there and win. I have a hard time with that, thinking about how Zaleski wins this fight, because he does have good up-the-middle attacks, I'd say, but he's not somebody who's all that known for throwing a heavy uppercut. He'll throw knees to the body every now and then, but I do worry that those are just going to kind of help Fakhretdinov take him down, if anything, and eliminate half his base. I've got Fakhretdinov in the matchup, and I do just think stylistically this is a tough one for Zaleski.
Fakhretdinov leads with his head, and he holds his head and everything ahead. So, yeah, if you had the knees up the middle like your Derrick Lewis against DeLima, ATT zone, you could do it. If you throw a lot of the uppercuts, Fakhretdinov throws a lot of kicks of his own.
True.
But he leaves them really naked, and as soon as he goes to throw leg kicks, he drops his hands, and he'll go to throw punches when he's off balance and planted off a kick. So it really will look like a guy that's completely unwound, and Zaleski could capitalize on that. I do think that Fakhretdinov will be able to go out there, utilize those takedowns, and really force himself upon Zaleski to make it a boring, grimy type of fight where he's able to wear out his opponent. So in this one, Matt, both of us going with the Gladiator, Rinat Fakhretdinov, to get the win. Again, some big time fights on this card. The Bonfim brothers, they're fighting, and you got Gabriel Bonfim taking on Nicholas Dalby in that co-main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Two big wins in the UFC for the former 300 Sparta bantamweight champ Daniel Marcos, nickname of Suncora. And what does that get you? Anybody? How about a debuting guy whose nickname is Striker? It's fucking terrible. It's Victor Hugo, Matt. Brazil's Tobias Funke. Would you agree with me there?
Yeah, I would agree.
Do you
I
think
oddly
he's a
enough
never
know
nude?
that reference.
Never nude in the shower,
Perhaps.
Tobias Funke. But Matt, Daniel Marcos was originally scheduled to take on another Daniel Willycat.
And how good of a fight would that have been?
Willycat's out of the fight, and in on short notice, October 3rd, it was announced by AG. What was it? AG. Yeah, AG Fights. That in is Victor Hugo Striker. So, Matt, when you do look at this fight, I mean, Victor Hugo has a ton of experience from outside of the UFC. He's riding a giant win streak. He's fought some pretty big names as well, and you can find a lot of his fights pretty easily on the YouTubes. You can find it on Fight Pass as well, and of course, he did just recently fight over on Dana White's Contender Series. Now, his last time out, he took on Chile's own Eduardo Matias Torres.
Not long ago at all.
And in that matchup, he got a giant win, one of those leg locks, and he gets a submission win. And when I look at Victor Hugo, I thought, geez, you know, the guy's 30 years old. He's almost 31. He's 24-4. Boy, I wonder what Dana White said after that fight. And sure as shit, he threw out one of his really good quotables. So I will quote Dana White.
I can't wait.
You know, I've got to be honest with you. I was up in the air about Victor in the beginning. He's 30 years old. And that pause is not just for dramatic effect. Dana White made a really big pause. He said, but he beat a young guy a young in his prime talented guy who was 16-1, finished him. And then he went on to say he's on a 13-fight win streak. So Dana White doesn't like signing 30-year-olds, but just about everybody on Contender Series this year got contracts, including losers. Victor Hugo's in the UFC. What I can tell you about this guy is he is a very impressive fighter that should have been in the UFC anyway. The one thing I found really interesting was in the pre-fight UFC video, the pre-fight Dana White's Contender Series video, Victor Hugo said this that was translated. I think I can compete, or I can hang with the top 5 in this division.
Wow.
Not a chance. I don't think he can.
I like the confidence.
Victor Hugo's fast and loose on the feet. He's got a giant overhand right, and he can land it to great effect.
He's got a nice left hook, too.
He can drop just about any fighter. On the in-betweens, he's a little bit laggy. He holds his hands incredibly low. There's a few fighters on this card that hold their hands at chopper height. Victor Hugo is one of those guys, even below chopper height. We're just hanging out, floating in the wind.
Rolling.
Now, Hugo throws really good kicks. He can get those hands up when he needs to defend a little bit, but he is pretty hittable. He has really good bevy of takedowns, and he's really forceful when he gets the fight down to the mat. And his jiu-jitsu is really good. He's got multiple wins by heel hook. He's got the knee bar win out there as well. He will take that knee home with you. Now, the craziest thing about Victor Hugo is you're 30 years old. You've had long layoffs at spots in your career. When he beat Cristiano Cruz not that long ago, I'll throw a picture up there. He beat him in a shopping mall. Hey, Mom, I want to go get the Cinnabon. How about watching bloodshed in a canvas in the food court of a mall?
We've both been to the West Edmonton Mall. They could probably host fights in that place.
They used to have practices for the
That's
Edmonton
what I mean.
Oilers.
Like, it's a big... So depending on what kind of a mall those fights were held in, it might be a really nice venue.
But Victor Hugo, he represents Astra Fight Team. That's already a big gym. You saw Astra Fight Team have Tyler Santos in a title fight. She's since left the gym. Obviously, things haven't gone well with her in that gym. But Victor Hugo is one of those guys that I think can make not just this fight interesting, even though it's on a few weeks' notice, but when you look at what Hugo does well, And then you look at the in-betweens that Daniel Marcos is good at. I think this is going to be a really good fight.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really excited for this fight because you weren't up until I think I can be in the top 5, and I'm like, I don't agree with it, right? Like, I don't think Victor Hugo can fight guys in the top 5 right now. Bantamweight's one of the best divisions in the UFC. But I think he can get to that point if he can keep on making improvements. But he does have to make those improvements sooner rather than later. Because if you do look at every individual component of his game, there's not a lot of negatives I can bring to it. You're right to bring up the striking defense, and that was something that really did stand out. Not that he seems to be hittable, because he does do a decent job defensively. You bring it up. He can get the hands up. He can roll with shots when he is getting landed on. But if you look at his offensive striking, he can land left hooks to the body and leg kicks. He can land nice overhands. He will, like you say, get a little bit fat with his movements and prioritize the power over just the technique and have a little bit of loop to his shots. But if you trim some of that off, I think there is a lot of positives to build on. That's all. Not that I think he can beat a guy like Daniel Marcos on short notice, because Daniel Marcos is 15-0 on purpose. Like, Daniel Marcos is a very, very talented fighter in his own right.
Daniel Marcos fought nobody in his native Peru to become the 300 Sparta champ. Then he goes over on Contender Series, fights Brandon Lewis, drops him in the third round, finishes Simon Oliveira, and then his last time out, a split decision win over Davy, who's still in the Navy, Davy Grant.
Grant's good.
Significant strikes in that fight were 70-48 in favor of Grant. Grant also got a takedown in that fight.
Exactly.
And Marcos won that fight. It's very, very chintzy. But if you look at a guy like Victor Hugo, you can go back and watch his fight at Sicario MMA Ford, where he's taking on Whitson. Yes, Whitson Costa. Victor Hugo, he's wearing pants. He was wearing pants.
It's a questionable decision.
He wins that fight. And again, that big overhand right against a much bigger opponent. He finishes Costa. You can watch his fight with Pancrase 311 against Shinsuke Kame. In the first round, big takedown. Gets it early. In the second round, a huge overhand right knockdown. His opponent pops right back up to his feet. And then Hugo goes and gets a takedown. In the third round, he looks great. He gets a takedown. He gets a finish. Hugo is good in all of the areas of the mixed martial arts. I can say that confidently because the tape's out there and you can find it easily. He's also competed at welterweight, super lightweight, lightweight, featherweight, and bantamweight. I don't know how he makes bantamweight. Well, I do, because he's 5'7". But Victor Hugo, a guy who's been a pro since 2011, reminds me of a guy that used to fight at flyweight. Now he fights with Cage Warriors. He's with every single promotion. He's fighting at bantamweight. He's all over the damn place. Who is it, Matt? Not your favorite fighter.
Not Jared Brooks. That's who I thought you were.
Wilson Hayes. He reminds me a little bit of a Wilson Hayes.
He is, yeah.
You're great.
His striking's more complete, though. Like Wilson Hayes.
You got a hell of a record. But I don't know if you can do it against those upper echelon guys. Now, Wilson did it, and he got to the top 15. He got a title shot. I don't know if Victor Hugo can do it, but this is what scares me a little bit. Daniel Marcos, he's either on and he's hitting on all those half beats, or he's not. And you look at the different gyms that Daniel Marcos is trained with. From Peru to Contender Series, he moved himself to the States without the help of his family. They stayed in South America. Daniel Marcos paved his own way to Contender Series, and then he ends up getting that big-time shot in the UFC. He's beaten Simon Oliveira, the front choke submission specialist, and his last time out, even if you have a win by split decision over Davy Grant, if you can make it competitive, I don't think he won that fight. But even if you beat Davy Grant, okay, that's pretty big. Now, did the UFC think much of it? No, because they matched him up against Daniel Willycat. So ultimately, it doesn't mean all that much. But Daniel Marcos training out of now, and I gotta say it, the Institute of Human Performance. Damon Blackshear there. You also have MMA Science Academy and the Pack Fight team with Landon Quinones and Roger Kral. Those are important. Now, when I hear Institute of Human Performance, Matt, my mind automatically goes to the inception of Festivus for the rest of the world. It's like the Human Fund.
I think of when there was a documentary that came out when Chael Sonnen fought Anderson Silva the second time, and Chael, who lives in Oregon, right, he was like, I'm training at the Nike Institute. And me as a kid thought that was the craziest thing ever. Like, wait, an MMA fighter has Nikes?
And then Craig Allen, as an adult, bought the 4-pack Revolution Chael Sonnen book. That really exists.
Do you got it yet? Do you have the 4-pack?
It's in the room next to us here. But Matt, when I do look at this fight, Daniel Marcos, what does he do really well? This is what the people came for. Really good straight shots. His boxing's really good. His leg kicks are great, and he's very defensively sound. Good defenses when it comes to his wrestling. He's great in the scrambles, and he can keep it standing to where he can win out. Victor Hugo is sneaky. Very sneaky. And we saw a fighter very recently out of Shoot the Box, Diego Lima, try and shoot for one of those knee bars. You know those knee bars. and you don't get in a great spot. The Hugo fight where you see him go for a knee bar, the fight against Christian Cruz, he's able to go out there, and I know, it's considered a heel hook win, but where he gets that knee, gets it outstretched, you see it against Colin over there on Contender Series. This guy just somehow wraps these up, but doesn't get hit, so you always have to worry about that. Not just there, but also if he's able to scramble out of a bad position and get on top, he's got good ground and pound, and he can threaten with a lot of things. So I think he's fast and loose with his defensives, and he could get hit quite a bit by Daniel Marcos, but by the same breath, I think Victor Hugo is one of the more appealing underdogs that's on this card. And Hugo's a pretty big underdog in this spot on the short notice. He's the slightly older man, both of them 30, but
which
a little
is
bit
wild, yeah.
older is striker, Victor Hugo. When we have a look at the topology votes, Matt, I have an idea where they're going to be, just off a guess.
I think I know.
I'm going to say over under 80% Daniel Marcos. I don't think people are going to be sharing the zest that
I'm
have.
saying 70% Marcos, I'm going to say under.
It's slightly under what I said, but if we're playing like a Price is Right, you still won. 79% on Marcos to win, 80% by
and
decision.
I think it's fair.
For the 21% that have Hugo, 46% have him to win by submission. So the fans probably only watch this Contender Series fight where you got a submission win, and they're looking at his last two fights and like, this guy's leg lock specialist. Who is he, Brett Johns?
Put them tangs on him, though.
He also did threaten in the first round, his last time out against Colin, with a calf slicer like he was Brett Johns. But when I look at this fight, Matt, after watching the fight tape, I just kind of found myself down a rabbit hole. And I give Victor Hugo a bigger edge.
We're really putting him over right now.
No,
we're like Hulk Hogan at 05.
I think this fight's going to be really close.
I do too, and hopefully we did give Hugo his flowers, because I do think he's a really exciting prospect. If he still is categorized as a prospect, he's over 30, so it's questionable. But
is Nathaniel Wood still a prospect?
Not in my IC8, but he's been around the block time and time again. I wanted to pick Hugo because I was so excited by the tape, but then I talked myself back down, right? It's on short notice, and when Marcos is on, I do like his game. The leg kicks are impressive, the straight shots are nice, like you bring up, and he can throw at a good output. I know Davy Grant had that edge over him the last time out, but that was Davy Grant firing on all cylinders, right? He's got a lot left in the tank, to quote Mark Henry, so I've got Daniel Marcos in this fight, but this is one where even if Hugo loses, I don't think he loses any stock from it, right? I think this could be a fight of the night contender type matchup to where both guys leave this in pretty good shape.
And I made a mistake earlier. I said Victor Hugo, the fight was announced on the 3rd, and I couldn't find it up in my notes. He fought on the 3rd.
Yeah, it was 3
beat
weeks
Colin,
ago.
And then on October 10th, the fight was announced by AG Fight that Victor Hugo would be taking this fight. I'm going to go with Marcos ever so slightly. I think those straight shots down the middle could win it for him. But this is a question mark kicks fight. I want to see these two guys square off, and you very well could see me. I know it's a bad sell on Saturday. Switch the pick, because in my head, it's pretty darn close to 50-50. Let us know who you have down below in this fight. Let us know how much you enjoyed the tape study from both of these men. And make sure you check out the rest of these videos. Matt, the next one. This is going to be a close one. Elves Brener is taking on Esteban Ribovics. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Name Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. 2023 Cinderella story continues on, Matt. Elves Brener, blue hair don't care. That was me in our UFC 290 videos, because I said I'd dye my hair blue on Twitter if Elves Brener beat Guram Kutateladze. Well, apparently lightning strikes twice. Brener off of giant underdog wins over Zubaira Tukhugov. Happy trails, get out of the UFC. And the never healthy, but still trying, Guram Kutateladze. Now Elves Brener gets, I don't know if I'd say an easier fight, but he gets a fight against El Gringo. It is Esteban Ribovics. Between these two guys, 28 finish wins. And Matt, Ribovics off of his first decision win, his first UFC win over Camwella Kirk, where he was able to rally back. First round, dealing with a little bit of the grappling of Kirk. But again, happy trails. See you later, Camwella. No longer in the UFC. And Ribovics gets to move forward. This is two premier gyms up against each other. Killcliff FC for Ribovics. You have Brener training at a Shoot the Box Diego Lima. And Matt, for Elves Brener's last time out there against Guram, he drops the first round. In the second round, between the second and the third, his blonde hair is red. But in the third round, you saw that big left elbow in tight. Brener drops Guram down. He cowers up. And Brener's able to pull away and get the never seen, just Cinderella story, I can't say it enough, win. So Matt, for Brener coming into the UFC, why has he been such a big underdog? Because he wasn't all that impressive. I know he comes out of
fair to bring up.
I know he comes out of a big gym. But every big gym has fighters that aren't all that great. Anderson Silva once had a protege named Marcos Mariano, and he ended up 6-6 and outside of the UFC. He was awful. Shoot the box Diego Lima. Not everybody's a peach like Charles Oliveira. Every now and again, you get a thunder gun like Thomas Almeida that flames out near the end. So when I look at a guy like Elvis Brener, he struggled in some of the grappling exchanges. He'd struggle against some of those more technical strikers on the regional scene.
Got that dog in him, though.
But again, he does have that resolve, and we've seen that recently. Brener, the other 2 wins before that, Adilson Ramos, a submission win, and Victor Nunes, who was 3-1 to come into the UFC to pick up those wins. Brenner's been a very big surprise. And when you look at these two guys, just numbers on a page, and when you consider their acumen and their striking, Elvis Brener is a jack of all trades, and Esteban Ribovics, man, we've seen the takedown defense tested his last 3 fights, and it's kind of funny, and I'll mention some of the numbers. It's actually held up, even though he's been taken out a ton, which is a weird thing to say. But his striking, man, he picks his shots and his body work, and then really to go to the head, it is quite good. So I think this is going to be an awesome fight while alive.
And that's what I really like about Esteban. Once he notices a weakness in your defense, he can go back to that well, and he does a good job of hiding it too. He's not just going to overthrow that one technique. I thought Esteban was going to come to the UFC and like change people's minds of what you can do as an MMA fighter. I really thought he was going to be a great prospect, and not that I don't think he could reach that potential at a certain point, but for Esteban, the takedown defense does worry me at the highest level, right? At the lightweight division, you're going to find a lot of guys who are really good at wrestling at a certain point, and if his takedown defense doesn't improve, because the big issue I have with Esteban's game is if he hurts you, he can get a little wild, and if he gets a little wild after he hurts you,
both guys can.
They both can, but still, hear me out. If Esteban hurts you and then gets wild with it, if you are that plus wrestler, how many fights do we see Kevin Lee win where he got hurt, was wobbled, and then all of a sudden shot for the legs? It's an issue I think Esteban might run into if he does move up the rankings, and it's something that it might not affect him in this fight, but if he does notice he does start to get wild, that's when the takedown defense really does become a massive liability for him. But this is going to be an awesome fight. This is a fight where I think both guys show up as the best versions of themselves, and might kind of get rid of the idea of, oh, their level of opposition wasn't amazing on the UFC, because if they fight each other and put on a great fight, then I think it does kind of solidify both men's spots.
Well, I mean, Guram, how good was he really? He fights the level of his competition. He burned himself out early, and you don't want to make any excuses because Elvis Brener was able to capitalize, finish him. He gets a performance bonus. He hits as a giant underdog, and he's hit as a giant underdog in both matchups. Regardless of what you thought the score was in the Takugov fight, if it was 30-27 Brener, I'd be scratching my head, but it was on one of those scorecards. Again, Ribovics struggles against the takedowns. We saw Rajabov land 11 takedowns. Kamala Kirk had success. Thomas Paul was trying for them. But Ribovics with a striking.
And the body shots are phenomenal. You bring them up. Like when he's able to land them in combination with the headshots as well, he does a really good job of making guys mix up the defense head to body.
And he also switches stances and throws a really nice left hook from either stance. So look at that from Ribovics. But for Elvis Brener, where it gets really interesting, he works the head and the body to great effect. He throws really good leg kicks. The knees to the body are a big thing. His takedown defense was the biggest X kind of against them coming into the UFC, and we haven't seen it tested just yet. I don't anticipate it in this fight. No. I think we're going to get car crash striking, and that's what makes it a lot of fun. So, Matt, this fight, I mean, it is aligned very, very closely. If you consider it for a guy like Ribovics, he has just the one UFC win. He is the underdog. He opened as a plus 150. He's a plus 120 right now, so he's gained a little bit. If we have a look at the Topology votes, surprise us there to you. Brenner's got 2 big UFC wins.
He does.
I'm going to say over under 72.5% Brener.
I think it's going to be under.
And it's over.
Wow.
1,299 total votes. 80% Brener, 70% by decision for the 20% that have Ribovics, 61% by decision. So, the fans don't anticipate a finish in this fight. The odds are closing in on Ribovics. Who do you have here?
I felt like I was going to be a hipster and pick Ribovics, but I've got Brener in the matchup. Again, I do like the steadiness. I think that's what's going to be most important. Esteban can get into a blitz or nothing category sometimes, and if you can start to anticipate and land on the in-betweens of some of those bigger shots, you can halt the overall striking, even though I do think the ceiling of his striking might be a little bit higher between these two guys. I just think it might also be a little bit more predictable if you're able to halt it before it gets going. So I do have Elvis Brener, but I think it's going to be a fight of the night. I can't stress it enough. And if I say that, I don't think it's going to be one-sided, right? You've never seen a fight of the night where it's been 30-20, so I think it's going to be a really close match.
If Brener loses this fight, he looks like a diminished version of himself. Even in some of his wins on the regional scene, you went, how did he win that fight? Because He can get a little lethargic. He can get backed up behind the black line. He can get taken down. And he doesn't look like the guy that you've seen in the 2 UFC fights, especially his last fight. So in this one, I feel like it's a little bit of a hangover from the Guram win, being such a big name. Now all of a sudden you're a favorite. You're favored to beat Esteban Ribovics. Matt, the most important part about this fight and us making picks on this, I picked 2 underdogs at the start of this card where we split the picks, and you're up by 1 on the season lead, and it's for all the marbles at the end of it. Give me another underdog. I'll take another one in Esteban Ribovics in the matchup. I think he's going to be able to show up, to show out, and Argentinian MMA is awful. It's awful. Argentinians are terrible in the UFC. But Ribovics is coming in off his first win, and I think he's going to get it done in this one. I think he's just a little bit more technical, but it's Brazil versus Argentina.
Do you know what the world was saying about Canada from like 2013 until a blip in 2017?
In what sport?
Well, in MMA it was tough. Roy McDonald was like
world
our biggest
stage, it's
representative.
awful right now.
That's
terrible.
what I mean. So like, think about what Argentina's saying about us too.
I don't think people are going to trash Canada in the comments, and rightfully so. Just in general on the world stage. It's bad right now, but Matt, we're split on the pick in this one. I'm going Ribovics. You're going with Elves Brener. Some big-time fights on this card, including Almeida taking on Lewis in that main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. And this is a get-right fight at lightweight coming up this weekend. One half of the Flying Bonfim brothers looking to get back in the win column, taking on Vinc from Hell Pichel, close to his 41st birthday, coming off a hip injury and looking to move the chains forward. And Vinc Pichel is such an interesting fighter because in the UFC, he's 7-3 and everybody forgets about him. He's able to go out there against prospects that are up and coming, and he's able to just thwart them. And Pichel's one of those guys that when you watch him fight, if I showed you a silhouette of Vinc Pichel, I think people would recognize him. A, you're going to see the mustache. B, you're probably going to see a really tall, upright boxer. But the thing that people forget about Vinc Pichel is the wrestling. Exactly. And it comes in handy. It's in his back pocket. And over a 10-fight sample size in the UFC, averages 3 takedowns per 15 minutes. We saw it a little bit against Austin Hubbard. We saw it against Marc Madsen. He was able to get an offensive takedown in that one. Against Jim Miller as well, that's where Vinc Pichel was able to shine. But when you look at a guy like this, you wonder, okay, well, where's he been? I listened to an interview that he did, All-Star Sports Zone, JHK MMA, and he said kind of after that Madsen fight, he had the hip injury that was nagging, he got surgery, he got a second surgery to clean it up, and he was supposed to come back and fight this past summer, but he was out of a scheduled fight. Now, Matt, for Vinc Pichel, that's really interesting, because who was he supposed to fight earlier on this summer? Benoit Saint-Denis, and who took that fight? Ismael Bonfim, and Bonfim was out there. He got beaten up. He lost that one. And Benoit Saint-Denis, he's just a star to the rest of the world now out of France. So for Pichel, he's kind of touching on the fact with JHK in that interview that there's a lot of things that you can kind of overcome with a guy like Bonfim, and he leaves big holes. This is going to sound bad. It's like an ad for X videos that could be filled. So a lot of holes that could be filled. So a good opportunity. The other big thing for Vinc Pichel in that interview that I found interesting, the kind of hook to get you interested, the first 5 seconds, the quotable is, straight up, it's finished or get fucked. So Vinc Pichel in the X videos comparison, it's there. But for Pichel, he can be quite defensively sound, and he's good in pretty well all areas. For Ismael Bonfim, you know him for that good amateur boxing, the good pro boxing. He's 24-3 as an amateur in boxing, and 4-0 as a pro. And if you look at it, you remember the big slump down, flying knee knockout win over Terrence McKinney. You can think of it as a finisher, and he is very dynamic, but this is another skill check against the vet, like Rinat Fakhretdinov has against Elizeu Zaleski earlier on in the card.
It definitely is. The weird thing about Pichel, though, is I liken his game a little bit to the Cowboys' defense, and this is why. This is a reference I hope people are going to get. The Cowboys' defense are really good, right? They've got a great line of scrimmage and whatnot, but if you run it on them, teams have had success. And how I always look at Pichel is, don't wrestle him. He might be a better striker than he is a wrestler, but it seems like every time guys tend to wrestle him, they just get tired going for those takedowns. He has great cardio. He's able to defend the majority of them, and then they are much more reduced versions of themselves in that second and third round, and that's where we can see Pichel completely take over in a lot of these matchups.
No, every single one of Vinc Pichel's lost in the UFC.
No, he'll lose the third round.
No, all 3 of his losses in the UFC are because he's got out-wrestled.
My whole point is, though, he can threaten guys on the feet, and guys have gone in there to just wrestle him, and he's been able to overcome them. How do you beat Marc Madsen?
He didn't beat Marc Madsen.
Sorry,
He lost.
he lost, but how did he have success in that matchup is my point. All of these fights, he's able to defend some of these takedowns. He's like a poor man's Ally Quinta. There's a reason Michelle didn't fight guys in the top 15.
If he was a poor man's Ally Quinta, he wouldn't have lost to him on the Ultimate Fighter 15 and end up losing the season to the eventual winner, Ally Quinta. He's not a poor man's Ally Quinta.
You think he's better than Ally Quinta?
Well, one's still in the UFC. If Vinc Pichel was better than Ally Quinta, he would have won the fight against him. There's strike one, there's strike two.
He's not as good as Ally Quinta. He's a poor man's Ally Quinta, Craig, which means he's worse than him.
He's less than.
That's what I said! A poor man's. A poor man has less than.
You've been drinking Dr. Pepper, you and Adrian Yanez. I don't think it's a winning combo.
I don't understand what your issue is with some of these, because they make perfect sense.
Make an NBA comparison.
Vinc Pichel's like a good bench player you can only bring in for spot minutes because you worry about him in the long haul, because he does have defensive liabilities.
Who's the fucking pick in this fight, Matt?
I think Bonfim's going to have a lot of success on the feet, to be honest with you. I know the takedown defense has been an issue for Pichel in the past, but I do think the speed of Bonfim's going to give him the edge in this fight.
If you do consider this, I mean, Pichel's been a plus striker throughout his UFC career. Again, he's 7-3, and for a reason, even lost in that fight against Ally Quinta, ends up on the Ultimate Fighter 16 finale and loses once more to Rustam Khabilov. He gets slammed and knocked out. In those losses, Madsen, Gillespie, and Khabilov, he was taken down 15 times in those 3 fights, and he struggled. But he was able to beat guys like Joaquim Silva, drop Damian Brown way back when.
How did he beat Jim Miller, too? He defended those takedowns.
Was able to get offensive takedowns. I don't think you watched a single Vinc Pichel fight for this video.
Craig, he also out-wrestled him. Like, out-wrestling Jim Miller means something. Does it not?
I'm taking Ismael Bonfim to win this fight. I think his striking is going to show up, and I think he's going to be able to get it done with that and only that in this fight against Vinc Pichel. A big matchup of gyms. You have the ever-aggressive Serrato MMA being Ismael Bonfim. You also have Factory X Muay Thai Zone, Vinc Pichel, and even going back to it, hip injury caused him out of the Yakovlev fight. It caused him issues after the Madsen fight. We'll see how Pichel looks in this matchup. Make sure you check out that interview from JHK and the All-Star MMA. Some big-time fights on this card. The other Bonfim match. Gabriel Bonfim taking on Nicholas Dalby in this matchup on the top of this card in the co-main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
The main card of UFC Sao Paulo, it's riddled with clashes of styles. This is the first one, Matt. Rodolfo Vieira back in 2015 won the ADCC World Championship at 75 kgs. Armen Petrosian was an IFMA World Muay Thai champ. When you look at these two guys, Vieira is one of the best competition jiu-jitsu players of all time, and Armen Petrosian's one of the Muay Thai players of all time. On his UFC bio, Petrosian lists his hero as Giorgio Petrosian, which is funny because Giorgio's brother's name is Armen Petrosian, and Armen didn't want to go that way. So if you do look at this fight, Matt, Armen Petrosian, the former Muay Thai champ, the former Fight Nights Global light heavyweight champ, and so far in his young UFC career, he's been an underdog in some of these matchups, and he's been able to show up, to show out, wins over Gregory Rodriguez, AJ Dobson, and a big spot against the former Cage Warriors champ, Christian Leroy Duncan, doing the striking. And Christian didn't really show up in that matchup. So, Matt, when you look at this one, Petrosian going to look to keep this fight up, keep it standing. And for Rodolfo Vieira, you'll remember him for performance bonuses over Dustin Stuyvesant. Habas Magomedov was able to do that too. And Cody Brundage. Now, let's go back to Adolfo's last fight. Cody Brundage is going to look at it and see a tale of 2 different fights. Brundage drops Vieira in the first round. Second round starts. Adolfo looking to get in there, getting squirrely, trying to get squirrely, get in close and get the takedown. Brundage obliges by pulling guillotine. Adolfo gets up against the cage, arm triangle. That's all she wrote. Matt, Adolfo Vieira, again, I've said this earlier on in the card, in for a penny, in for a pound. This guy will snatch your neck like it's nobody's business. And we've seen it from Vieira. We touched on this from the very start of it. Can he get hit? Sure. Can he get dropped? Sure. You even go back to his fight against Saparbeg Safarov as evidence where his eye swelled shut. He's able to get the takedown, get the submission, and didn't have to go from round 1 to round 2 for a doctor to look at it. Armen Petrosian on the other side, he's been taken down. Gregory Rodriguez was able to do that, even in some of those earlier fights, and I know we've touched on it. Armen's got one of those but was that really a pro fight earlier on in his career that was brought into the record, where you have a record scratch on Fight Finder with Sherdog? But for Petrosian, to his credit, if he gets taken down, we've seen him get back up. We've also seen Petrosian look really crisp in the first round and then kind of wane as things go on. I think back to the third round against AJ Dobson where Mark Coleman's yelling, "Come on, AJ!" Mark Coleman. Yikes. But Petrosian is a kicker to the nth degree, and on the back foot, he really does leave those spots to where if you can't get in, he will be there for that counter shot. So again, I can't stress it enough how big of a clash of styles this is, and it has to suck big time if Friday's weigh-in day and it's also your birthday. So happy birthday to Armin Petrosian on weigh-in day.
Out.
The morning's bad, but that night, I don't know if he has Lennox Lewis nights, but that night, gorge yourself with the food. Indulge.
I have a really hard time with this fight, and I kind of laughed when I saw that the odds were near even, because nobody has any idea what to do with this fight. You bring it up. There are a number of Clash of Styles on this main card, and this one does lead it off to quite the start, right? Because if Petrosian's going to have any success, it's not going to be with his back on the mat. I can certainly tell you that. And I think both guys can have a cardio advantage by the third round. That was the only thing I wanted to say. Not that either guy has great cardio, but let's say Petrosian can defend a lot of those takedowns with more of the footwork than him just trying to brute strength out of it with the underhooks. Then I do think his cardio is going to look a little bit better than a guy in Rodolfo who might have to shoot for those takedowns from longer away. But on the flip side, the exact same thing can be said for Rodolfo. If he's able to secure a couple early takedowns and really force Armin to get back up to his feet, because that's what he is really good at doing. And to his credit, he does work to try to get back up to his feet, but if Adolfo's constantly grabbing those wrists and breaking him back down, it's just going to burn him out that much more, and that's why I think it's a weird fight, because both guys have an easy chance to win this in the first round. That's easy to say, right? Like, Petrosian could win by first round knockout. It'd be crazy to see, but it could happen, and Rodolfo could win by first round stoppage. But by the third round, I think it could get a little weird, just depending on how the fight looked up until that point.
And everybody remembers third round Rodolfo Vieira chasing takedowns against Chris Curtis, but you might not remember against Brundage. He went 1 of 6 in takedown attempts in the first round. He got dropped in the first round, and that's still fresh. Now, for both of these guys in terms of their camps, you look at Armin Petrosian at one point at American Top Team a little bit, cross-training, but for this one, Universal Fighters in Russia, and he's been training with Roman Kopylov and Anatoly Takov. And I think body-wise, Anatoly Takov's a little bit like Rodolfo Vieira. The guy's yoked up, and he beats most people over with Bellator. And for Rodolfo Vieira, always at Fusion XL, Brazil to Fusion XL, but he's been bouncing around, really training with a lot of highly regarded folks. You'll see maybe Lyoto Machida out there on his Instagram mixing it up a little bit. So, Matt, when you do look at it, you kind of mentioned it. I mean, the odds are pretty well at par in this matchup. We'll have a look and see where they started. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. We'll get back to you on that one. But when it does come down to it, the ever-important, the Topology votes, let's see what the fans are thinking. If it's close like that, I'm going to say over-under 60%. I can't be your Superman. I can't be your Superman. I can't be your Superman. Armin Petrosian. I'm going to say 60% over-under Petrosian.
I'm going to say over.
And it is over. 1,328 total votes. The fans, they've got Petrosian. 73% with Petrosian. 68% by decision for the 27% that have Vieira. 76% by submission. Matt, years ago, 1 studio ago, I went outside and I had my phone in my hand and I took a video of myself going, Rodolfo Vieira, like, this guy's so hot right now. And then he ended up losing to Fluffy Hernandez. I think Vieira clubs and subs his way into a win, years and years ago. Like, it's got to be awkward when you lose a fight, and you lose a fight so handily, and then years later you fight on a card and that guy's there. Kyle Bahalio's that guy, Spider-Man meme for Armin Petrosian. But years ago for Petrosian, the fight against Hassan Yousafzai, who ended up with the PFL, that was how he lost his belt over there. So for me, I think it's going to be a fight like the Yousafzai fight. I think it's going to be a fight like the fight against Kyle Bahalio, and I think Vieira's going to be able to get himself into position early and get the win over Petrosian.
I've also got Rodolfo in this matchup. People are probably going to roll their eyes at that because I feel like I've never picked Petrosian on any of these videos, and this is a really close fight. It is one of the biggest clash matches that you will ever have. So if Petrosian's going to win, he could win a 30-27 and look completely amazing if he's just able to keep it on the feet and make Rodolfo throw some of those long, sluggish shots from the outside. But I do think Vieira's going to be able to get his way to the inside, because you bring it up. Rodriguez is able to take down Armin Petrosian, and I don't think Rodriguez has the top game of a guy like Vieira. Adolfo's heavy in that top spot when he's able to get it. Is he going to go 10 for 10 on his takedowns? Probably not. But when he's able to get that position, he does quite a bit with it. So I agree with you on the pick.
If Vieira flaps against that mat, doesn't get those takedowns, it could look really bad. And Petrosian could be able to pull away. Let us know who you have in the matchup. Both of us going with Brazil's Adolfo Vieira to get the win. We get some big-time fights in this card. Almeida's taking on Derrick Lewis, another big clash of styles. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. It's another one of those clash of styles coming up this weekend. A man who's perennially near the top of the card. In a young UFC career, we have the natural, not Robert Redford. It's Caio Borralho. He's going to be taking on Abus Magomedov. And Matt, it all depends on when people watch this video. It could be just before or on Halloween. And if it is, happy Halloween. And if it's after, well, you know what? The folks, they probably have a little bit of the loot at home. So I get some Sour Patch Kids here. I got all the Maynard's Greats. Some Swedish Fish if you want them. For our American listeners, Smarties. You know, Smarties.
It's been a while since I've had a Smartie.
Well, then eat some. Go ahead. But for Caio Borralho, to make the references, I mean, Halloween, it's one of those things where you're able to squirrel that candy away. It's a little bit like Shutter Island. It's a little bit like Stairway to Heaven. It's a little bit like the show on Netflix, Midnight Mass. Caio Borralho has been a bit of a slow burn for UFC fans. And why do I say that? Because he's fought 4 times in the UFC. 3 of those 4 fights have been co-main events, including his 2 first UFC fights. Now, the UFC's done a bad job with co-main events, and with Abus Magomedov, they've done a bad job with main events too. But for Caio Borralho, his last time out, it was a co-main event, and he took on Hussar, Michael Olszewczuk. And he got his first UFC finish, and he got a bonus, and he looked amazing. And now all of a sudden, it's not a slow burn. You're right up there. For Abus Magomedov, years ago, people remembered him as that guy, that really flashy striker with the really nice Anderson Silva front kick. And by the way, UFC debut did that against Dustin Stoichkos. But like years ago, Magomedov, I mean, against Luis Taylor, eating that left hook and going down, eating just untold punishment in the second round on Canada Day against Sean Strickland. And I'm not making this up. My wife, our in-laws, they were over. And our backyard, the trees go down, and off the back deck, you can see downtown a great, great festive Canada Day fireworks show. As I'm sitting there watching the screen, what did I watch? I watched Sean Strickland get walked down for a round against Abus Magomedov. And then I watched the beginning of a champion, Matt. Abus Magomedov wilted under the pressure and had nothing left in the second round. So I'm a little bit surprised that for a guy that likes to take a lot of time off between fights, that he's back in there so soon after getting clowned in the second round. And I know this sounds really harsh, but Magomedov looked terrible in that second round.
He did not look good.
He looked awful. And I don't normally take that angle. He looked terrible. And for Caio Borralho, this is where it gets interesting. He's such an awkward striker, whether it's from Orthodox or Southpaw. He's got that long range, almost karate. We already mentioned, or I mentioned Machida in the last fight, training with some big fighters. Borralho looks like a carbon copy. He's a grappler trying to imitate Lyoto Machida. He's got good kicks when he does decide to. He's got really nice odd-angle punches. I don't think that's the way to do it against Magomedov. But we'll see how this one plays out with Magomedov, a UFD staple, training an American top team for this one, and Borralho at his combat club and Fighting Nerds down in Brazil. I think this is a really, really good fight, a really interesting fight, and a huge buy low spot on Abus Magomedov.
It is a really big opportunity for both guys because if Magomedov is able to go out there and beat Borralho, he does get back into that spot, right? Like, this is by far the best win he's had in the UFC. I'd say you'd rate this over the Stoichkos win. So for Magomedov, I know he didn't look good against Sean Strickland, but at this point, like you said, we saw the beginnings of a champion.
Israel Adesanya didn't look good against Sean Strickland.
Guess what? You're not your best version when you fight that man, it turns out. Sean Strickland's really good. But the 2 big points I wanted to touch on, I'll circle them back into yours. Magomedov did have a lot of success early on against Sean Strickland, but once that distance started to get collapsed, he didn't have an answer for as many of the boxing combinations of Sean Strickland. Not that Borralho is going to go out there and close the distance in the same way to stay in the pocket, but he could use the takedowns to close the distance and collapse that pocket in a very similar manner. But you bring it up too, his tendency to stand at range is going to open up a lot of the benefits of Magomedov, and if Abus is able to, sometimes he will put his back up against the cage even if he's in a beneficial position, I will bring that up, but if he is able to lean back, back, really let his kicks flow, and throw some of those up the middle shots, not only are they going to hurt Bahalio and hurt his gas tank to the body, but if he throws enough up the middle attacks, Bahalio's going to think, hey, I can't just shoot for takedowns against this guy unless I do eat one.
And again, Magomedov fought good level competition with the PFL. He lost in the $1 million fight against Luis Taylor. He went back on the regional scene with EMC, gets a win over Slavica Simonovic, who was making his pro MMA debut. He's a 40-65 Bosnian boxer. And you had a first-round 47-second Kimura win for Magomedov. His next time out, he took on one Cezarish Kejic over at KSW 57. He gets a win there, gets it by finish, and then he blasts Dustin Stoisfus. Again, Magomedov, underdog in this role. Bahalio is favored. I think the weirdest fight Bahalio's had in the UFC is fight against, you know who it is, Mahmoud Muradov, where Muradov was going for takedowns. Bahalio wanted to strike with a really good boxer. It was just an oddball fight. Bahalio ends up getting the win. He is, again, favored in the matchup. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. I'm going to let you set it because I feel like the odds are down on Magomedov because he looked bad against Strickland in the second round, and he lost by finish. And I think the fans are going to have Bahalio, but I'll let you set that.
I think like 85% for the natural.
I'll say over 85%. Oh boy. 1,298 total votes, 90% Bahalio, 31% by decision, 51% by submission. For the 10% that I'm Magomedov, 55% by knockout. Bahalio's fast and loose with his striking. We haven't seen it as much in the UFC, but if you watch his tape on the regional scene, you'll see it. He also, don't forget it, 2021 Dana White's Contender Series, had to get 2 wins. The first one over their guy, now Bellator's guy, but their guy, Canadian, Aaron Jeffrey, wasn't good enough. So I do have Kyle Bahalio in this fight because I think, again, collapse the distance, get the takedown early like your Jailton Almeida, and make it nasty against Abus Magomedov. But the one thing that I said earlier, Magomedov at ATT for this camp with a guy that he was supposed to fight, Aliaskhab Hezriev, training with him, Magomed Karimov, and Kairula Karatuliev, a guy who hasn't fought all that much but has a winning record. But again, those two guys, Hezriev and Magomed Karimov, are going to set you up well for a fight against Kyle Bahalio.
They definitely will, but I do tend to have Bahalio in the matchup. Probably by decision, though. I do think it's going to be hard to go out there and get a stoppage, even though he is such a talented fighter. But I bring it up on purpose. If Magomedov wins this fight, it's going to put him right back into that spot he was before the Sean Strickland fight. He's probably not fighting Sean Strickland in the main event of a fight night, because that would be weird for the middleweight title. But he could fight a Brad Tavares next. Just one of those guys who's in the mix and always has been. And I honestly think that for both guys. Whoever wins this fight, I could see them getting like a Brad Tavares type name. Because Drinkus Duplessis is a guy who I was thinking of, but he's far too high up in the division, and that'd be a bad matchup
He's
for
popping
Bahalio.
His pants off and wearing a South
He's
America
getting wild in
underpants
France.
with his buddy, in front of the Eiffel Tower. And when it comes down to it, Matt, the UFC, they don't do gimmicky fights. That's why Francis Ngannou went away, and that's why Abus Magomedov got a main event based on merit and talent alone. So, Matt, in this one, both of us going with Brazil's Kyle Bahalio to get the win. Some big-time fights left on this main card. Matt, I know that we're excited about that main event. Jailton Almeida taking on Derrick Lewis. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. If you're not ranked and you're a heavyweight, you can spar with John Jones, but you might get him out of the UFC 295 main event slot against Stipe Miocic. At least that's what Lord Kong Dante Almeida was unfortunately the training partner to have done, defending the Jones takedown, tearing the pec. But Dante Almeida, he was also getting ready for a fight, and he's going to be taking on Brazil's Zé Colmeia Rodrigo Nascimento. This is a guy who, at this point, 10-1, the lone loss to Chris Daukaus. He was favored to beat Daukaus. And since then, it's been an interesting ride. And for Dante Almeida, apart from the John Jones fanfare, he knocked out the legend, one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. All the fights that he's had, the former champ, Andrei Arlovsky. Dante Almeida was able to go out there and finish him his last time out. So Mays gets to move forward. He gets to take on Nascimento. Nascimento, you'll remember, he's on a 2-fight win streak, but you won't remember them. Why? Because they were awful fights. He has a split decision win over Tanner Boser and a split decision win over Ilir Latifi. Matt, those fights don't put your name on a poster, but fuck it. Let's put them on the main card right before the co-main event. Unranked heavyweights, they, for some reason, they court favor with the UFC, and we get another spot here. So, Matt, I know every Dante Almeida fight I talk about something he never uses unless he's fighting Josh Parisian. That's his judo, slamming that cup into Parisian's face time and time again. And for Jailton Almeida, what do we know him for? His boxing, but it hasn't looked all that great, and he's looked a little sluggish his last 2 fights.
And that is the disappointing thing to see, because that was his X factor in the heavyweight division. He's not a big kicker, he's not the greatest striker of all time, but his strikes are really fast when he's able to throw his boxing combinations. And when he gets into range, I like the way he's able to roll with some of the shots coming back his way. But you're right to bring up, he has looked a little bit sluggish, and I do wonder if it's the threat of the takedown coming back his way. Not that Ilir Latifi's the greatest fighter of all time, but if he was going to win that fight, he was going to use the offensive wrestling, and Tanner Boser to a lesser degree, but still he can go out there and get it done with the wrestling as well. I have a hard time with this fight though, because for me, I thought Mays did look decent against Arlovsky, but there's also another part of me that says, is that just the end of line for Andre? Because Arlovsky was able to hold on for like 8 extra years just fighting prospects, because he changed his style and he wasn't getting knocked out, right? He was much more of a volume heavy guy. I just don't know if he can eat those shots anymore, so there's a part of me that thinks Dante Mays has put it all together, and his boxing's good, he's got nice hands, he can also throw in combination, but there's also a part of me that says, hey, Andre Arlovsky's really old, and he's been in more hard fights than anyone could ever imagine.
Is he Steve Winwooding it? Is he hitting that higher love? I mean, he's a part of the champ camp. Now, think about that champ camp. Maurice Green is there, and Walt Harris is there, and listen, I mean, the athletic commissions, the USADAs of the world, they're not his friend, but when you look at it for Rodrigo Nascimento, same thing can be said. Go back 3 fights ago. It's a no contest on Nascimento's record. He loses the first round to Alain Badeau, a real thing that happens, and then he rallies through and finishes him in the second round. It's a no contest because the Nevada State Athletic Commission, a little bit of Ritalinic acid. Listen, I mean, you're a baseball player and you want to be able to see that pitch coming in. Mash those dingers. Well, hey, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. But for Nascimento, it's a no contest on his record. Again, I think with that and the time away, we just haven't seen that same Chris Striker that we saw when he was taking on some of those bigger names. And I mentioned it for Nascimento, coming out of a big gym, American top team, Mike Brown over there, training the big guys, Pahumpa as well. So we'll see what version that we get of Nascimento. 13 fights right now as we tape this, 13 Brazilians, all littered down the card, none of them facing off against each other. We'll see if that kind of hometown rub for the favorite.
Does the winner of this get a ranked opponent? Because I brought it up earlier in the card, right? It feels like there's the top 15 in heavyweight, and then a lot of guys outside of that could beat each other on most given days. I struggle with where you project either one of these guys with a good win.
I hope Nascimento does, because he is ranked, so I hope for Nascimento's sake he does get a ranked fighter, and I think a guy like Jairzinho Rosenstrike,
that's a great call, honestly,
might be the next guy for that. Just style for style, don't give Jairzinho another wrestler.
I just worry with Nascimento if he goes out there and wins another really close fight like the last two, because you're right, they were not fun to watch at all. No. If he does go out there and repeats that, I just feel like they're going to have him be another stepping stone for another guy. But when he's able to put together the boxing, it is really nice because he has that great threat of the jiu-jitsu as well in the back pocket. And I do think his grappling, if he's able to get on top of a guy like Dante Almeida, could really overpower him.
Like he did when he submitted Dante Almeida years ago, because that's right. This is a rematch, and Nascimento is 1-0. He was able to get the win over Mays a number of years ago. Matt, we have a look at the odds in this one. Nascimento favored in the rematch. Baby, now we got Bad Blood, Matt, and Taylor's version, 1989.
Kendrick Lamar going to be there?
I don't know. We'll see. But, Matt, when we do have a look at this one, I'm going to say over under 80% Nascimento in the second
I'll
fight.
say over. They've been wild.
And it's way over. 1,332 total votes, 90% Nascimento, 44% by decision, 35% by submission, 14% by knockout. For the 10% that have Mays, 70% by knockout. I think Nascimento beats him again. I think it's a little bit of mind games. It's a little bit of fluffing it and getting those 2 wins in a row. You get confident when you're back home. You hit your stride. Nascimento gets a win and holds a spot in the rankings.
No, I think it's a great point. I couldn't agree more. I've also got Nascimento.
Matt, some big time fights on this card. Let us know who you have in this matchup. Both of us going with Jailton Almeida, Nascimento to get the win. It's one half of the Flying Bonfim brothers next. Gabriel Bonfim is going to be taking on Nicholas Dalby. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. It is a big-time co-main event coming up this weekend. The ultimate skill check. Danish Dynamite Nicholas Dalby looking to play spoiler again. And since coming back into the UFC, he's 5-1 with a no contest. He's looked amazing. And he's just shy of his 39th birthday. Again, looking to play spoiler against one half of those Bonfim brothers. It's Gabriel Bonfim. He's undefeated as a pro. all 3 of his UFC wins. First round submission finishes. He's got a Von Prue choke, ladies and gentlemen. And his last couple of times out, again, Munir Lazez with the guillotine. Trevin Giles getting back up out of it. And he's probably thinking, oh no, not that Zach Cummins fight again. Oh yeah, that Zach Cummins fight again. Bonfim pulls back. He adjusts himself into a guillotine and he gets it done. So when it does come down to this one, Matt, a lot of people are going to be high on the younger fighter, and how could you not? He had an undefeated boxing record. He's looked amazing inside of the cage, and all of those wins, just awesome finishes and awesome submissions are out there too. But Nicholas Dalby, why do I say he's a skill check? You look at those 3 wins in a row. I know he's got the split decision over Warley Alves that doesn't hold a lot of weight considering Alves' last loss, but that was against a really good fighter. Exactly. The Claudio Silva decision fight, which if you go back and watch it, after the first round, Claudio was huffing and puffing for air. But again, split between, or after those rather, Muslim Salikov, he gets the win out there. Nicholas Dalby with his Wim Hof, he just loads up on the breathing for the first round, the second round, the third round. Dalby, I don't care if he was 25, I don't care if he's nearly 39. He's got 3-round cardio. He shows up to fight, and he's always the same version pretty well in every single fight. He can give you an awesome fight of the night like he did in the Cage Warriors title fight against Ross Houston.
One of the great fights.
He can give you the weird scrambliness against Alex Oliveira when he came back into the UFC at home in Copenhagen. He is a true one of one, and when I think of Nicholas Dalby today, I'll probably think of him the same way. He makes it a tough fight for anybody when he takes him on.
So like Lady Gaga in that Bradley Cooper movie. I'll always remember us this way. Me and Nicholas Dalby, of all people. Nicholas Dalby, I can openly admit, I seem to write off every single fight he's ever had post-35, and he just keeps on proving me wrong. I was going to bring up a name, but it might be too fresh based on what we just watched. He's kind of like Geno Smith, right? They wrote him off, but he didn't write back. And that has been the really nice thing to see from Nicholas Dalby, because what I assumed would have faltered at the age that he's got to, which is the durability, because he is hittable, right? Like, we've seen him get hit by some big shots. He's been hurt by big shots, too. But that stick-to-itiveness to out-wrestle in bad spots, he can scramble in bad spots. He can then respond with his own volume in bad spots.
A lot of people have sung the song, but Canada's own Fred Penner put it on the map. Cat came back the very next day. He always comes back.
But he's really going to need that stick-to-itiveness against a guy like Gabriel Bonfim, because Bonfim is such a talented striker in his own right with his own power shots. And the thing that we brought up before he ever came into the UFC was you got to watch out for the defensive submissions as well. It's something he's always been good at. He realizes a lot of his opponents are going to try to collapse that distance, go for the hips and try to take him down. And the way that he's able to cinch up those necks is really impressive. I know him giving up a takedown kind of led to the Von Prue choke, but hey, if you're that good with your submissions, what am I going to do? Argue with you? So I really have been impressed by what I've seen out of Gabriel Bonfim so far in the UFC. And how can you not be? Because like you said, 3 straight first-round wins is nothing but impressive.
And Dalby, the lone loss in this 5-1 with a no contest since he's come back into the UFC. You remember that comeback fight, the Cannonier card against Hermanson? The one loss is to Tim Means, but the no contest that nobody talks about was against Jesse Ronson. Ronson coming in at 170, up a weight class on short notice now. He's a Samurai 165 top grade, the super lightweight. Jesse Ronson in Quebec right now. But against Dalby, he drops him and he submits him. I think that's what Gabriel Bonfim's going to do to him. Bonfim is a big favorite. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Surprise to us there to you. I'm going to say over under 90% Bonfim.
Probably over.
It's over. 1,408 total votes, 95% Bonfim, 68% by submission for the 5% that have Dalby, 79% by decision. We haven't seen Bonfim go past the second round. It's been since 2021. He did it once against Brener Alberts. So we'll see if it happens in this one. He's still got the finish. He's undefeated in all 15 wins by finish. We'll see if that continues on. But I do think Bonfim can get it done just with the mix of wrestling that he has with that tricky sidewinder striking that he possesses.
And when Dalby is fighting to his fullest potential, he is a very in-your-face kind of guy. And I worry that that's going to walk him into some of those counter shots from Bonfim. So I agree with you. I could see this being if it's a submission win, it's probably going to get set up with the strengths because Bonfim has that in his pocket for sure.
Both of us going with Gabriel Bonfim in the matchup. Let us know who you have. Is it Danish Dynamite or Maratinha? A big-time main event. 2 polar opposites in terms of styles. The all-time knockout leader in the UFC, Derrick Lewis. The submission specialist, Jailton Almeida. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Finally, time for the main event of the evening. UFC Sao Paulo, Jailton Almeida taking on Derrick Lewis. And Lewis really getting a big opportunity in this main event, putting himself back up there once again. His last time out, a big-time first round flying switch knee
Insane.
to ground and pound knockout win over Marcos Rogério de Lima. I'm sure the Brazilian fans are going to be amped about that. And if you can believe it, for Derrick Lewis, I mean, having all of this UFC experience, having 2 title fights, one for the interim belt against Ciryl Gane, one for the real McCoy at UFC 230 against Daniel Cormier. This is just the 4th fight for Derrick Lewis in his UFC career and his career in general. Outside of the United States, he's fought in New Zealand against Marc Hunt. He fought in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada against Travis Brown. And he fought in Zagreb, Croatia against Gabriel Gonzaga years ago, getting a finish win there. But this is, of course, a giant clash of styles. And we can really just wax poetic about Derrick Lewis and his knockout abilities. But for Jailton Almeida, this guy is a takedown artist that few know of. And now the wrestling superstar, formerly known as Edge, now by his real name, Adam Copeland over with AEW.
The rated R superstar.
He made the spear famous. Jailton Almeida has been in the UFC for 5 fights. Against Danilo Marques, it took 7 seconds. Parker Porter, 3 seconds after a front kick. Against Anton Turkalj, 12 seconds. Against Shamil Durkimov, a front kick caught, a left hook eaten for his troubles, and then, 8 seconds. And then against Jairzinho Rosenstrike, 4 seconds. What does all that mean? Jailton Almeida takes an average of just over 6 seconds to land his first takedown attempt in his UFC fight.
He knows what he's good at.
It's insane. So, the ultimate takedown artist is Jailton Almeida. You know how good his grappling is, his submission ability, his ability to soften up his opponents, wrap the legs, and then get to the back. It's second to none in this division, and he's on a rocket ship to the top. So, he gets a big opportunity, it's a really big name, and Lewis gets to silence critics once again.
It's an interesting matchup, because we can go on, like you said, for as long as we want to about how much of a clash of styles this is. But the biggest question mark I have about Jailton Almeida at this stage of his career is, when will he start to get predictable with some of those takedown attempts? Because that's
I don't know, 6.8 seconds.
But the problem is, when are people going to be able to take advantage of that factor? Because everybody knows it's coming. So how are you going to stop it? It's very similar to Damian Maia when he was on his run, right? Everybody knows he's going for the rear naked choke, but he just kept on getting it on every single fighter. And for Almeida, I do think at a certain point he is going to face that test, and that's why I was so excited for the Curtis Blaydes fight, because for whatever critiques that you want of Curtis Blaydes' game, the guy can grapple. Like, he is an absurdly good wrestler. And I think we would have seen Jailton Almeida on his back. In a situation like that, it would have been really interesting to see how he would have done. Now, Curtis Blaydes isn't the aggressive fighter he was in that Overeem fight. That would look insane if he would do that every matchup. But I think it really would test Almeida and the totality of his skill set in the gas tank as well, to see him get out of some of those bad positions. Whereas this fight is really... and you hate to sound like such a meathead, but it is the truth. Can Lewis land that one big shot? And I know for him that one shot can come in a variety of different ways. We've seen him throw spinning back kicks in person. He won his last fight by double switch knee, like you said. Like, the guy has that one knockout punch, but he has it available in a plethora of different ways. I just worry that that's not enough against somebody like Jailton Almeida, who's shown how dominant he can be. And the thing, I know what you're going to say, probably not, but Derrick Lewis, he could just get up. And that is going to be a factor, because Derrick Lewis does have surprisingly good grappling defense, I would say. He can't get stuck in bad positions, but his ability to just simply get back up to his feet has been quite impressive. Almeida's just such a dominant presence in that position, though, and like you said, he throws the ground and pound, and that's going to keep your hands occupied up here and not getting back up to your feet.
I mean, UFC 293 to now, you look at all of the main events. You had Strickland beating Adesanya, you had the draw Grasso Shevchenko, you had Gamrot beating Fiziev, Green beating Dawson, Barboza beating Yusuf. It's all of these veterans getting wins and all of these underdogs getting wins. Now, Makhachev beat Volkanovski, and that kind of set the trend back into the normal way. But when you do look at this fight, Matt, for Derrick Lewis, tied at the top. I mean, 5th all-time in finishes at 14. Number 1 all-time in UFC history with 14 knockouts at the promotion. Wow. He's got 8 bonuses in his time. And again, he's 2-1. It's a limited sample size, but 2-1 outside of the United States. And the last time he fought outside of the U.S. was in 2017 against Marc Hunt, and he got finished, and he didn't look very good.
Yeah,
but again, Travis Brown was 2017 at the start of the year. He got the win there, and of course, the win over Gabriel Gonzaga years and years ago in Zagreb, Croatia. You look at this one, Lewis is the underdog. We threw it out there to you in the YouTube community tab, but put it as a picture to see what the results would be. A lot more. Hottest of dogs doesn't want to see us go. Daniel, got to be Almeida in round 2. We've got Richard Koshorek saying Derrick Lewis by KO TKO, and Afui saying Almeida by submission mat. A lot of people in the comments are going Jailton Almeida. Topology has Almeida. We might as well go to the percentage on Topology too, just to see.
I'm gonna over 95. You think?
I'm gonna say over. It's under. Look at that. 1,376 total votes. 87% Almeida. 79% by submission. For the 13% that have Lewis, 95% have to win by knockout. And if you look at it for Lewis in terms of submission losses, there's only been about 3. But I look at them like, you think about Daniel Cormier.
He's been put in bad positions.
Yeah, that one was by submission. Even...
Well, like, Olenek got him in the submission. He just couldn't complete it because Derrick Lewis is too big.
He's got a big neck. And Lewis has that just get up mentality. He's got the buzzer beater coming back. And if this goes past a first or a second round, what's Jailton Almeida going to look like? Because he did have a main event against Rosenstrike, but it was over. It also didn't have the juice of being a fight in your home country.
Exactly.
In the Apex. So
emotional.
For Jailton Almeida, a big shot. Do you think he gets someone over Derrick Lewis?
Derrick Lewis, you do want to believe in spurts, right? Like, he's a little bit like Gordon Hayward on the Charlotte Hornets. If you watch him every now and then, you're like, hey, he's still a really good player. Then you watch for a full game, and it's like, hey, the injuries have taken their toll. He's not the guy he used to be. And for Derrick Lewis, you kind of have to look at him in the same light. I know heavyweights can last on for a lot longer because power's normally the last thing to go. But Derrick Lewis, earlier on in his career, was pretty quick, too. And he's still athletic, I would say, for how big he is and the age that he's at. But you do worry that the losses and some of those injuries, too. You bring up the Marc Hunt fight. The lasting image in my head of that Marc Hunt fight is just him holding his back. He's had a lot of issues with his back, and that's something that never, like, you can get over it, but you can still have issues with it for a long time. So I have Jailton Almeida, but I bring up his predictability on purpose. I think at a certain point, someone is going to take advantage of the fact that, hey, he's going to shoot from a mile away. If I just backpedal immediately, I can probably avoid the first one. And if you can make him pay on some of those in-betweens, and like you said, get him in that 3rd, 4th, and 5th round to place Derrick Lewis has been much more than Jailton Almeida, maybe he can win this fight.
Lewis lost to Tuivasa, Pavlovich, and Sergey Spivak before he was able to right the ship. His last time out against Marcos Rogerio de Lima. He was favored to beat de Lima. I didn't think Lewis was going to beat de Lima, and I certainly didn't think he was going to beat him that quick. He did. So now he comes into this fight against Jailton Almeida. And again, when you count a guy out like Derrick Lewis, you mentioned the New Zealand fight against Marc Hunt. Since he fought Marc Hunt, he got 2 title shots. So he was able to overcome and oversee some big-time wins in his own right. I think Jailton Almeida is going to be able to get it done in this matchup simply because he's able to get the takedowns early. He's been able to get them often. And the other part about it for Jailton Almeida, shooting for your first takedown in 5 fights at an average of 6.8 seconds is great. But look at what Sergey Spivak was able to do 2 fights ago against Derrick Lewis. It was 5 or 6 takedowns in a round. And Spivak's able to go out there and get the finish. So it probably won't come as a surprise to many that we're both going with Jailton Almeida in the matchup. But there's some really big fights in this card. I know I went with a fair amount of like oddball underdogs on it, but I think there's going to be a lot of really close, really interesting fights. There's 13 as of Sunday night when we tape this. Lucas Alexander kind of out there, doesn't have a fight with David Onama anymore. So if anything does change on this card, from now until UFC 296, you can find us here at Fight Night Picks. We'll update you as best we can. But again, I know there's some really interesting ones, and you mentioned a really fun possible fight of the night that's on this card. There's a lot of those out there.
There definitely is. I love the Elizeu Zaleski to Santos versus Rinat Fakhretdinov fight. It's a fun fight to be earlier on the whole entire card. The Petrino Bukauskas fight should be a really fun one as well. And of course, Magomedov versus Bahalio. That should be a really interesting one because the winner of that's probably going to get a big name opponent their next time out.
So many clashes of styles. You can find us on X and Instagram at Craig Allen FMP, at Matt Allen FMP. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.